All right, good morning, everyone. Welcome to the October 10th Hanford Advisory Board Cleanup and Risk Mitigation Committee meeting. Again, my name is Lindsay Summers and I'm the DDFO for the Hanford site. Just a few reminders before we get started. All of our meetings are conducted in accordance with the Federal Advisory Committee Act, and each member has a joint responsibility for assuring the operating ground rules are observed and discussions are conducted in a respectful manner. I'll turn it over to you, Josh.
Thank you. A couple of brief administrative items. We have a sign-in sheet up by the front table. If you haven't already, we would appreciate if you would sign in. If you're attending online, you can enter your name and affiliation in the chat. These meetings are being recorded, and we posted the Hanford Site YouTube channel. And again, people attending online, press down repeatedly. We will see them over here, but we will hear them and speak to them over here for the hours. And with that, we can ready to get it over to you, Tom.
Hi, everybody. So you'll see there's a copy on the back table of the rap sheet for the meeting. This is sort of a Reader's Digest version of the administrative record where I go through and find documents that aren't just lab reports. Not that lab reports aren't important, but there's 450 postings on the administrative record since our last meeting, and I got it down to a page and a half. There's a digital copy in your email, so you can actually click the links and read the documents as you're interested. Wanted to start off by going around the room and introducing folks. And for folks who haven't had meetings a lot, like Josh said, right, you have to talk to the owls, or else the people online can't hear you very well. So even if you're having a conversation over here, talk to the owls. It's a little weird. Okay, so I'll kick it off. Tom Cecilia, I represent Oregon Department of Energy, and I'm with this.
Roberto Amigo, I'm with Environmental Protection Agency.
We have Rick, I represent Hanford Challenge.
Then I'm with DOE.
Shira Gev, employee, non-management, non-union.
Matthew Campbell, Confederated Tribes, the Umatilla.
Ed Parsons, Public at Large. Chris Sutton, Public Interest.
Pat, facilitation team.
Kevin Danby, represent Grant and Franklin County.
Larry Brandt, Public at Large.
Ron Davis, representing the city of Pasco.
Bob Burke, member of the public, member of the HAD.
Kathy Dubois, non-union, non-management.
Charcoal Preston, League of Women Voters.
Rebecca Holland, Hamtech.
Brian Ivy, Public at Large.
Lindsay Summers, DOE.
Marianne Wanacke, HNIS.
Laura Caulfield, Catmite. And I just Alvarez, Ecology.
Tom Rogers, Washington State Department of Health.
Brian Facilitation.
And for our members online, I'll run down the list on teams and I see them. Feel free to open your microphone when you call your name. Theater.
Dieter Borman, CPCCO.
Dan.
Dan Solitz, member of the public.
Catherine.
Catherine Glick, lead hydrogeologist for Ecology Nuclear Waste.
Regard Matt, Matt Hendrickson, Oregon Department of Energy.
Yeah. Michelle.
Michelle Jones, Department of Ecology.
Me.
Yakima Nation.
Liz.
Liz Matson with Hanford Challenge. Good morning.
Ryan. Simone?
Simone Enter, Columbia River Keeper.
Susan?
Good morning, Susan Coleman, Public at Large.
Thank you, everyone.
So looking over the agenda, we've got a briefing coming up on 324 building, which, has a nice change. There's no slides. We're gonna have a conversation, which is great. And then I brought slides, to talk about, one of the things on the work plan, is risk communication, how the agencies communicate risk to the community. So we want to get sort of our heads around what questions we feel like we need answers to be able to write that advice. That advice is with a joint advice with the COE committee, Community Outreach and Engagement Committee. I understand the agencies aren't ready to bring briefs to us yet, so we want to get ahead of that and figure out what we want to know before we have a talk on it. We'll have, some discussion of the 320, or not the 324, because that's the 5-year placemat, public meeting, which was last night. Annually, we do a cleanup priorities advice from the board, which is input from all the different committees, and we compile it, and then, that usually comes out in February, so we're a little ahead of the game to start brainstorming on what we want in that advice. Then we have, vice chair election. We have a nominee for vice chair, but he's eligible to serve, so, we will do that election after the break, and open forum, which is sort of our soapbox. Anybody can say anything that's on their mind, and then plan the next meeting. So that's what we're going to do this morning. I'm open for ideas for lunch if anyone has any recommendations. So after the meeting, but are we ready to jump in and be a little bit early for 324?
Let's do it.
Okay.
All right, so I'll stand up just so everyone can hear and see me. So Ben Benna, been working on the 324 project since 2018 timeframe. And so we've got some changes going on with the project, some of which you guys are familiar with. Some others that are new may not be, so I'll cover some background information. I know there was also the question of, we're doing a briefing at full board on the same topic. But since you guys are the CaRM, I just wanted to give you guys an early preview of that, just so people can start thinking about questions or anything that they would like to ask at the full board. The other reason for coming now is we've got, which I'll explain this, a focused feasibility study going over to EPA on this topic, the 324 building. 300-296 waste site. At that time, it's a draft day, so some of the tribes will get a courtesy copy of that. So the document will be out there, some people will be looking at it. So just wanted to give an initial pre-briefing on what's going on. And then you will get slides next month on this. So just a high-level overview of what today's briefing is about. So DOE and EPA were reevaluating components of the approach for remediating a 300-296 waste site. I'll go into the backstory about that. And that's due to some of the technical challenges that we've had while implementing the current approach, as well as new data that we discovered about the waste site that's underneath the building. And we will be reopening the ROD. I know since I've come here in 2018, I've always been asked the question, can we still give advice on this? Can we still weigh in? So we are reopening the ROD. That means there is going to be a public comment period for everybody to weigh in. After reviewing the documents, if you guys get a chance, and that'll be in the spring timeframe. I'll give a month, May, but that's subject to change. We're still pretty far out, so I'm gonna say spring, early summer.
We got a new class of folks. What's a ROD?
Excellent point. So record of decision. So for our cleanup actions out here at Hanford, this one is being conducted under CERCLA, which is an environmental regulation. There's a process that we have to follow to ensure we're doing our appropriate due diligence for cleaning up that waste site, and there is a sufficient amount of public involvement. So once DOE comes up with what we believe is the best approach for cleaning up the waste site, EPA's we proposed it to EPA, and they're technically working with us that whole time. Propose it to EPA, we go out to the public saying, hey, here's what we want to do. We'd love your feedback on it. Do you agree with, is our approach too risky? Is it appropriate? How's our timeframe looking? And then, once there's agreement on that, we take public feedback into account. EPA will issue a ROD saying, all right, we've agreed on the cleanup levels, the approach, and, sometimes usually in the work plans, there'll be a time frame. But so that's what a record of decision is. So, and it's pretty big. At Hanford, just due to the scale of some of the work we do, it can take almost 10 years from site discovery, usually a large area or collection of sites, 10 years from initial investigations to developing a ROD. So that's pretty big. And reopening a ROD can be quite a time-consuming event, but it does, in this case, open the public comment period again. Thank you. And if there's any questions like that, you guys are they allowed to raise their hand and ask questions, or are we saving them till the end?
Whatever works for you, I think works for the group.
Our standard practice is if there's a clarifying question, you can sort of jump in, but otherwise, let's get the briefing done, then have agency response, and then we'll open up to the committee.
Sounds good.
Clarifying question.
Go for it.
Thanks, Ben, for your presentation so far. Is this an amendment to the ROD then, or is it gonna be a whole new record of decision?
It'll be an amendment to the ROD.
Okay.
So yeah, and that's, and there's 3 types of ROD changes you can have, just a very minor one. You can do an ESD, an explanation of significant difference, which may or may not have a public comment period. And in this case, EPA is the one that makes the decision. They said, this is pretty high priority. There's also going to be, a cost change as a result of this. So yes, EPA said we do want to reopen the ROD, which works out pretty good for those that have been wanting to provide public comment on the approach.
So may I suggest there's a lot of new members here and they may
Yeah.
not have the historical perspective of what is the issue with 324?
That is my next point. Thank you. So, let's jump into the background real quick. So 324 building, this is a building that was constructed in a 300 area, so about a mile north of Richland, close to the river, about 3 football fields away from it. It was built in 1966. It was for research on nuclear materials. And there's big rooms or laboratories in there called hot cells. Scientists were dealing with radioactive materials, in some cases so radioactive, they can't be in the same room with it. So in these hot cells, large rooms, 4 to 5 foot thick concrete walls, thick windows, and the scientists would remotely have to do their experiments that way. So very difficult, hard to see. And 324 building's got a really neat history. It supported some very large programs of the federal government. Eisenhower's Atoms for Peace program, where they're looking at, okay, we can use atoms for destruction, but what are some good purposes we can use atomic energy for? So it supported that program, looking at alternative fuels, atomic energy fuels, and then vitrification of high activity waste that we have, some high activity materials. That wasn't done first, WTP pilot projects. It was done first at the 324 building with some cesium, strontium, and other materials that we vitrified. So that was neat. But as you'd expect, over the course of those 30 years, there were some accidents that happened. And that's what led us into this situation. So you have the 324 building, and then beneath it is what I'll be calling the 296 waste site. And it resulted from this accident. So in 1986, scientists were working to vitrify some very high activity cesium, strontium, very concentrated. And there was a spill. They overflowed, and this is in one of the hot cells, 4 or 5 foot thick walls, so they're safe. But they overflowed the container, I believe, and about 500 liters of concentrated cesium strontium fall onto the hot cell floor, and it collected in the low part, the sump area of the hot cell. And you might say, okay, well, why didn't they go clean it up? Well, the bottom of the floor looked kind of like the teenager's room. There was junk that fell down there. It's actually 10 feet below grade, so it's kind of like a basement area. And when stuff would fall down there, they just leave it down there. And enough debris had collected in old experiment pieces to where they couldn't really see the hot cell floor. So they didn't see that this cesium strontium solution, which was highly acidic, actually ate through the stainless steel liner, the bottom part of the floor. And, and it made its way down into the soil. And there's using my prop in a bit. But, so as I was saying, it's we're over here. We got you. Perfect. So this is a B cell right here, and they didn't know about this, that there was a hole in the hot cell floor. So for refer to this, back in 2009, we're getting ready to demolish the building. We're cleaning up the bottom of the B cell floor, removing this legacy highly radioactive debris. And so this is B cell right here. This big block, it's got some openings, but it doesn't have those openings in the building. Just a structural design that we had. They found a hole. They said, oh, there's a hole. There's probably something below the hole. You shouldn't have a hole in a stainless steel liner. So they, and this is under the building. So what they had to do, thank you very much, by the way. So what they had to do was outside the building, they had to dig down and push some probes beneath B cell, that hot cell. And what they found was that in the soil, those probes are checking for dose rate or radioactivity. The probes are going beneath the hot cell, ping, high radioactivity, then it would go back down. They'd get to another point below the hot cell, high radioactivity, go back down. And that's when they discovered there was an issue. So 16 probes, or essentially pipes, were pushed beneath the facility, and then a device was used to check the activity, the dose rate below there. And essentially, so this is the cross section, a side view of B cell. These are the walls on the side. That black is your stainless steel liner. And there's actually a floating slab on the floor. The best way I can describe it is, if you go out to the sidewalk, there's some little felt liners or pieces between the sidewalk blocks. That's essentially, there were some of those going around the bottom of B cell floor. That radioactive liquid made its way into the liner. And what they were detected back then in 2000, I believe it was 10 and 11 timeframe, was that below those felt liners, you'd have a high dose rate. And they would go back down as you went through the middle, the soil under the middle of the building. And you get to below the other felt liner, and you'd have another high dose rate reading, those big yellow spikes below the felt liner. So what am I saying? It looks like, or the data was showing that below those felt liners, below the floor, you had cesium strontium that made its way into the soil. And they eventually pushed some probes deeper down. There was no signs of it going down to groundwater. There was also groundwater monitoring, and they didn't detect any sort of spikes from that. But anyway, that's the history behind how that spill originated. And any question? And oh yeah, another thing to add is the data was showing that spill appeared to go down about 6 to 8 feet for the high activity. So that's not too far down. Groundwater from the bottom part of B cell is 40 feet, I believe, the high water level, 40 to 50 feet. So that's a pretty good distance between the bottom of the spill and groundwater, bottom of the high activity spill. Any questions in the background? Clarifying? All right. So yes, sir.
You said it ate through the stainless steel. So it ate through the stainless steel, then spread out and went down to the belt, or?
Great question. So the stainless steel liner actually starts higher up on the walls, and it works its way down, kind of holding a protective barrier or cup to capture anything that might go spill on the walls or go down to the floor, just to protect the concrete. Does that make sense?
So it ate through the liner and then spread out and went down with the felt.
Correct. Mm-hmm. Yep. So the approach, the current approach, I would say, as is written in the ROD and our current work documents, is all right. That spill is right below B cell. We don't see any lateral movement beyond the B cell.
So an easy way to clean that up, if it's only the high activity 6 to 8 feet deep, is to remove the floor B cell, and then dig out the waste site. And why would you want to do it that way? Well, the spill itself is highly radioactive, up to 13,000 R per hour. The way that makes sense to me is if you're standing on top of that spill, it's lethal within about 2 minutes. However, that hot cell is rated for about 1 million R per hour, so it provides all the shielding we need. Additionally, that hot cell filters all the air going through there and through HEPA filters, so it's a very nice configuration for digging it back out. So since 2013 was when the rod was done, it said, we're gonna use the building. The building has a lot of the tools we need in it and the safety design that we need to go dig out the waste site. And then, and that was gonna be done in 2 phases, essentially. Phase 1, go dig out high activity soil, which is difficult and expensive until you can get down to low enough activity levels to where phase 2 takes over. You can remove the building and then do open air excavation, which is a lot of what we do at Hanford quite often. So it's safe enough. We can do an uncovered waste site remediation. So that was the plan. And any other points? And there's always been some uncertainty, just exactly how much soil would we have to remove before we can get to phase 2. And that's, as I was saying, the high activity soil went down to about 8 feet. Our excavator arms that would dig out the soil, those were designed with factors of safety go down to 12 to 14 feet. A lot of the data was showing it went straight down, and we weren't having to expect to go lateral very far, which I'll talk about what interrupted that for why that presents an issue in a little bit. And also, if we're digging out soil from beneath B cell, another factor that I'll be talking about is structural modifications. Now, if you go dig a hole at the beach and you're digging in sand, some of which we have below the building, your sand's gonna collapse into your hole, which in this case, with the building on top of it, would undermine your foundation, just give you, in some cases, cleaner soil to dig out, which we don't want. We just want to target the high activity soil. So we had, starting in 2018 to 19, I think it was 19, we were drilling and conducting structural modifications to reinforce the building. We actually had a drill rig in the building, drilling holes through the floor into the soil. And we would create essentially concrete piles or supports that would catch the B cell. So as we're digging out, we don't want our B cell shifting and causing the doors, if your house settles, if it settles too bad, your door might get stuck. Similar concept with B cell. So structural modifications were being implemented, and that's when we ran into an issue. So I'll give you the timeline for that. In 2022, August, we're installing those structural modifications, some of which are drilled starting right around B cell. Other ones are being drilled from outside the facility horizontally. That was the only way to kind of get under the B cell door and install, in this case, almost a horizontal wall below B cell door to support it. And any questions or clarifications? Okay. So, and during that time, they're drilling in soil that, per the data that we had, should have been clean or cleaner, but there was a hot spot found. And in this case, it was about almost 1,000 R per hour, which that was way above what the Panel and some modeling based on the data we had. It was way above what it should have been in that area. We're assuming less than 1 R per hour. So we're orders of magnitude what it should have been. So that was in August of 2022. We wanted to get a better understanding of, could there be other areas around B cell where that contamination could have spread below the surface? Because even though back in 2011, I believe it was, we've done those probes characterizing soil under the building, you can only do so many, just because of the difficulty of putting some of those in. It's also quite an intensive effort to install those. So at the time, the designers acted on the best available data they had. And as rolling back to 2022, as we're drilling more holes, to install the structural mods, we're sampling, taking, some dose rate readings, and that's when we found the hot spot, so. That was the beginning of a kind of the technical challenge that challenged our design that we had for how we're gonna go remediate the waste site. Cause if you're having high contamination in the area where your structural mods are gonna be, then you can't dig that out, because now you're removing your reinforcement that supports the building. There were some other technical challenges that we've been having with the building, starting in about 2020 timeframe. Some of the equipment is original to the facility. In fact, some of the cranes in there that we use cranes to move stuff in between the hot cells, into the airlock between the hot cells. The cranes, some of them are old enough to collect a pension. And you know, a lot of the times at Hanford, we operate to where you can go in and do maintenance, but there's a significant risk to the people that go in and do that, to the dose rate they take. So in the case of the cranes, the decision was made, we're gonna operate those till something fails. And another factor, and then they will take the risk to go in and replace it if it's safe enough for the workers. Another factor, that prevented us from going in and doing maintenance on the cranes was they're so old, they don't make those parts anymore, which is why we actually had to build 2 new custom cranes, for the hot cells. And that was just in case something critically failed. But, so aging facility, the crane started failing, some of the, multi-ton doors that raise up to allow the cranes between hot cells. Those are raised up by, thick wires, one of the wires failed. So that took some time to replace. And where I'm going with that is we started having a more significant trend of failures. Workers having to go into the contaminated hot cells and repairing that stuff. So from that aspect, there's more risk to the workers, more delays. So looking at all of that data, our contaminations farther or larger than we thought it was in terms of expanse. Our facilities having technical challenges with pieces of equipment failing, and we're having to spend more time going in and fixing those. So DOE said, you know, hey, let's look at another way of doing this. And for the CERCLA process, regulatory environmental process we use to conduct the cleanup, it lays out a series of steps that you have to go through. And that ties back to the focused feasibility study. So based on this data, DOE said, hey, let's reevaluate our approach for doing this. And typically, we'd be able to do that without a rod amendment, but in this case, due to the fact that the rod unusually specified that the building is going to be used, you don't normally have design elements in the rod, but in this case it did. So EPA said the rod says you got to do it this way. So in order to go forward and change it, we got to go through the focused feasibility study process, issue a proposed plan, get public comment, and then we'll do a rod amendment. So that was the path EPA laid out, DOE agreed to it, and that's the current path we're on. So the focused feasibility study, that evaluates 2 specific scenarios. So some of you may be familiar with feasibility study that says, okay, based on this contamination and conceptual site model that we have for what your waste site looks like, we believe these are the some feasible alternatives or feasible ways to clean it up. Here's a collection of best ways. A focused feasibility study only looks, it's much more limited or narrow. So since we had already done a feasibility study for this site, EPA said, let's just look kind of at the 2 main alternatives that rise to the top. And one is, we've already put so much effort into getting the current design to work. What would it take to go in, replace the cranes, we have to redo the structural design just because some contaminations in the area that we're going to do the design. What would it take to move that out or put it in a different location? We've also had a number of boulders or some sort of obstruction below the building that prevented installation of that design in certain areas. So what would it take to make the current approach work? So that's option 1. still use the building, try to get out the high activity soil. Of course, we were so close. What would it take to make it work? And then option two is, the building's getting old. We've talked about the technical challenges and the risk of the workers to go in and replace and, maintain equipment. So why not just demo the building? And then similar to the, large structures that other sites put over the building, ARP structures that some of you may be familiar with. Do that same thing here, and then go remediate the waste site. And actually, with these, the hotspot that we found and the larger uncertainty for what this waste site could look like, DOE and EPA agreed, we don't want to do open air anyway. If we use the building to remove the highest activity soil, we don't go back, we don't want to do open air for the remainder of it. Just because we can't reach all the hot stuff. So we would still have to construct one of those containment structures, especially since we're just a mile north of town. Even if we go forward with option one, but at least under option one, you're removing some of that contamination sooner, whereas option two is demo the building, get it all out at once. And that does give us some pretty good flexibility. We're having new equipment that we can do if the waste site's larger than we think. We're not gonna have to redesign, midway through under option one and try to reach farther to get some more of it. So option two is pretty flexible, but that's part of what the focused feasibility study is gonna contain. So here's our quote.
Before you keep going, there's a couple of folks in queue that have clarification questions.
All right, let's do it.
And Simone, you had a question.
Hi, yeah, sorry, this is going back a bit, but so that hotspot that was found in 2022, was that 100 R per hour or 1,000?
It's 1,000, so 984 R per hour, and that's at about 13 feet below the hot cell and about 6 feet
And that was
away
below
from
the hot cell?
Yes, so everything right now is still below the structure, still below the building, where the foundation still goes beyond it. We get a pretty good idea of that, because that was part of our characterization efforts, in 2022 and 2023 was, let's try to better bound the extent of the contamination. So why is it important that the structure completely covers the waste site? The only way your cesium and strontium in the soil is gonna move or get down to groundwater is if you're introducing water, to mobilize it. So having the building completely cover the waste site, is good because it shields it from any sort of precipitation, which gives us more time to evaluate this. So it's in a safe configuration. That answer your question, Simone?
Yes, it did. Thank you.
Great.
And a question from Liz.
Thanks. I think you said it earlier on, but just can you remind me what the timing is for the focused feasibility study coming out, and then when you think the proposed plan might be out for public comment?
Sure. So right now, the focused feasibility study, we have a draft that DOE and EPA are jointly reviewing at the local EPA project level, project office. We're doing that now. The draft A, which will be sent to EPA formally, will be going out in November timeframe. At that time, the tribes will also get a copy of it. And then that review is a bit longer, just due to larger levels of coordination that we have through EPA upper management. And then in late spring, we'll be having the proposed plan come out and the public comment period. So both of those documents will be available for public consumption, and then we'll be looking for feedback and your opinions at that time. For the proposed two alternatives and the one that we want to pick.
So thank you.
Okay, great. Let's see, so that covers what I was gonna say about the proposed plan. So the focused feasibility study that evaluates your two alternatives, and then the proposed plans summarizes that, so it's a much shorter read. And it says, hey, this is the one we want to propose, here's why we think it's the best. Here's the factors that come into play in terms of technical difficulty between the two, cost between the two, and a number of other things. So having that public feedback element is another factor, so it's critical that we do, if you guys are interested, here's some feedback on what you think about the plan, because that could guide which way we go.
May I ask? You mentioned cost.
Mhm.
Have you finalized your new cost analysis relative to the new plan versus the original cost?
Yes, it's what, we're in draft review of it, but the idea, the cost or the estimate is available.
Okay.
And that'll be available in the focus feasibility study. Just don't want to say much until we've got a chance, DOE still reviewing everything, same with EPA. All right. And then public comment period, that'll be 30 days unless, I know sometimes extensions are requested or may be granted. And let's see. And yeah, just to wrap it up, another important point for the ROD amendment, I know this is of interest, especially to some parties. It's we're not opening the entire ROD, it's just the ROD specific to 300-296. So what else is in that 300 area record of decision? As we look at multiple waste sites in these RODs. 61811 is in there. It's a burial ground by Energy Northwest. So we're not opening it up for comments on that. Or uranium sequestration is another big topic, but it's not intended at the time to open it up for comments on that. It's purely for the 300-296 project, which is one of the most contaminated facilities on the river corridor. We're just looking for feedback on our new approach for that. So. And then, as I was saying earlier, there was always some questions of, hey, you guys are taking longer. Is that waste site safe? As I mentioned earlier, the buildings still right there on top of the waste site, no evidence of contamination extending beyond the footprint. So there's nothing that'll mobilize that waste site down to groundwater. Regardless, we still do monthly sampling into downstream wells. And we had PNL evaluate, hey, based on the current wells that we have in the 300 area, are we accurately capturing, let's say something would somehow get to groundwater? Are those wells in the right location to detect something that would come from the facility? And they did confirm that, yes, those are in a good position, absent some sort of unforeseen shift in groundwater direction, which would be quite abnormal, but if that would happen, probably have to wait for a new well. Yes, sir.
When will the feasibility documents be available to this board for review?
So that would be at the same time the proposed plan comes out, so in the spring time, right?
Springtime.
Wait, before we
Before we go to questions, unless it's a clarifying question. Let's finish up what you have and then we'll go to Roberto, but
Yeah.
I saw a queue starting.
Just a few takeaway points. So is the remedy changing? We're still gonna RTD, so remove, treat, dispose, still getting dug up and go into or the best or an appropriate disposal facility, based on the sampling that we do at the waste site. So that approach is still unchanged. What are we looking at changing? Whether or not we use the building to remove the high activity soil. That's the component of the remedy that is changing. I talked to the safety of the waste site and the timeline, but. And now I'll take any questions after the agency's way.
Thank you very much.
Mhm.
We're Rick.
Yeah, I have one, Robert Amigo, with the EPA, thanks Ben for the briefing presentation. You pretty much touched most of my notes, so I don't have too much to add on, except, that tribal consultation will also be part of the process, alongside public comment. Typically, well, I shouldn't say typically, but sometimes the, tribal consultation process happens, before public comment. Just all depending on how the timeline looks like at the time. Additionally, you already touched on this, but there was always uncertainty around how much cleanup was previously expected at the waste site after the remote excavated arms have done their work. And now that we know that the levels are outside of the reach of these excavated arms, it will not allow for the open air or direct contact of the cleanup in that site. But other than that, that's all I have right now. And if you want more information from the EPA personnel assigned to this, Her name is Annie McCartney. We're actually down on leave, so she couldn't be here today. So yeah, that's the one we called you.
And Ryan, you couldn't mute before, unmute before, but, are you still there or we have someone else from the college who wants to talk to 324?
Yeah, I was gonna, yeah,
Okay.
Roberto covered it. I have nothing else to, add to it.
Excellent.
I think we'll move to questions. We have two people in queue right now. We'd like to interview, Tom and Brian are providing examples. If you want to enter queue in the room, raise your physical hand. If you'd like to enter queue online, you can raise your team's hand. So we're gonna start with Pam, go to Liz, and I'll figure it out from there.
Okay, so, one of the things that doesn't get mentioned to us, was within the last year or so. Some people were working, in B cell and sprayed some water to try and get contamination out the wall. And that caused the contamination under B cell to move further. Can you discuss that?
So just to make sure I heard right, so they've been, and I've been away from that part of the project operations, for a bit. So in the group developing the focus feasibility study, but you're saying they applied water in B cell and immobilized the contamination below it? That I had not heard of, so I'll have to, Lindsay's taking that question down. I'll have to get back to that. Maybe we can talk about that at the full board. But I do know water application, there's a calculation that shows how much water you can apply without mobilizing the waste site beyond a certain degree. So that's interesting to hear. Thank you.
Liz?
Thanks. I just wanted to clarify between option 1 and option 2 that you're looking at. I know at one point, EPA had expressed interest in, can we get some of the contamination out before we build the structure over it? And you were saying, for either option, you would need to create that containment structure. Is the difference between 1 and 2 that the building would only be demolished after you've removed the B cell contamination? Is it the timing of the building demolition that's different between the two?
Yeah, thank you. So I'll clarify that. So under option 1, we're gonna remove as much high activity soil as we can. So there's a preference to try to tackle and stabilize the highest activity of this activity soil that's out there, rather than having to go through the process of demolishing the building. And then when you're demolishing the building, you're gonna have water application for dust suppression. So there's gonna have to be measures put in place to protect the waste site, whether that's an asphalt barrier or some other sort of barrier. So under option 1, you'd have at least the high activity soil that we can reach removed. So that's a big benefit of option 1. And then at that point, once it's removed, you demo the building and still build your containment structure to capture or remove what you couldn't reach down to cleanup levels, or I'd even say laterally to cleanup levels as well. That answer your question?
Yeah, that's great. And I was also just curious, what you were saying for the RTD, digging it up and going to ERDF, in what form will the contaminated soil end up in ERDF?
So the plan has always been to put it in shielded containers. In some cases, those containers may be grouted to prevent structural collapse when they're placed in ERDF. Other containers, I know there's a design being worked where they don't have to be grouted, but essentially dig up the soil with the remote excavator arm, put that soil in a bin that's a certain size. I think it's 30 inches by 30 inches by a little over 30 on the top or vertically. And then there's 16 dose rate readings taken on the bin. So you've got a good idea, is this a very hot chunk of soil that we're dealing with, or a not so hot chunk that we're dealing with? And then up to 3 of those would be packaged in a shielded container. And part of the reason why you want to know if it's high activity or low activity is workers have to interact around those containers, so you don't want to put all high activity above a certain level. Because then you're still gonna have some dose rate, on the outside of the container, so that would affect worker safety and transportation. But either way, those, would go off the permit. Assuming, the samples that we'll be doing come back that it's appropriate for it.
Thank you.
You checked to make sure I thought anyone, there probably didn't. Tom, Brian, Rebecca, Larry, Mia, Peter. Did I miss anyone?
Yeah, me.
Rob. Okay, Tom, your question.
Thanks for the presentation. It was really nice to get sort of a comprehensive story of how we got to where we are. I really appreciate that. A couple questions and then one sort of crazy technical one. When we comment on the proposed plan, are we also commenting on the focus feasibility study or just on the proposed plan?
It's, so you can comment on both. It's essentially the approach. So based on all the information we've provided, one, is it understandable or do you still have questions? And two, what do you guys think about it? We're a mile north of town, 3 football fields in the Columbia River. Do either of those approaches feel safe enough and the right approach? Some people may have some preferences on one or two, or some option 3 that, we haven't evaluated. And then those responses will be formally responded to. Usually, depending on the scale of the responses, we'll bin them. So similar questions would get grouped into a bin and we respond to all those at once. Rather than individual, just due to the amount of time it takes.
And then, last night we saw the 5-year placemat presentation. And in fiscal 29, it says under risk reduction, complete demolition of the 324 building and initiate waste site 396 remediation. I'm assuming that assumes that option 2 has been adopted.
Correct. Yeah, just because we are still required to plan out a certain distance, so option 2 seems to be favorable, but we are not allowed to commit, especially for the circle process, to an option that having gone out to the public and gotten feedback on it.
It's probably a similar or a little longer timeline if we choose option 1 though.
Option 1 is actually longer, just since we have to redo the design. So under option 2, we can go straight to demo the building and build the containment structure. Under option 1, we got to redo the design, complete the structural modifications, dig out the high activity soil, at which point it'll be safely stored in an appropriate disposal facility, and then build the structure. So there is a bit more time under option 1 to do the entire cleanup, but you're getting the higher activity soil out sooner.
And then my technical question will be the last one. And I'm going to need your help on an acronym. Is in the new feasibility study and amendment is the Atomic Energy Act an ARAR, and an ARAR is
Appropriate and relevant, requirement.
additional requirement. Yeah. Is that, do you know if that's being listed as an ARAR? It wasn't in the original standard.
To my knowledge, we typically do not list AEA as an error on that. I know there's been some questions about the Nuclear Waste Policy Act. Would that be appropriate as an ARAR? So, we do anticipate getting that question as well. Letting my legal's playing in on that one. But we do not include the NWPA at Hanford, but that's still the questions asked and correspond to it. I also expect, I know there's been a lot of interest on that one from the tribes, which is definitely acceptable. So they may get a response sooner too as well.
Brian?
Yeah, Ben, thank you. You mentioned there are 2 wells. Is that the total surrounding the 324? And if so, are they between the 324 and the Columbia?
I was gonna see if there's a whiteboard with no markers. Okay, so if you've got your good way to show it. So yes, they're between the direction of groundwater flow and the river. And they were specifically put there for monitoring the 324 building. There are other wells in the vicinity around 324, but they're just not sampled at that monthly frequency, which is actually quite frequent for Anthem. But yeah, those, and we had Ken and I'll look at it, because that was a question, what we were doing, anytime you have impacts around a waste site or you're doing activities, that do include water, application, could we be mobilizing anything? So, we were quite certain beforehand that the wells were in the right spot, but, there were still people asking the question, so we went to PNL, which is something outside of our local, Hanford field office. And I evaluated that, and I said, yep, as long as there's no unforeseen shift in direction of groundwater in the 300 area, then those wells are in a good spot.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ben, again for your presentation. First of all, I'd like to make a clarifying remark, as far as the water being added to B cell. I know that we've added water into the airlock with a hot seat, doing decontamination there. That's where the water, as far as I know, as a worker at 324, that's where the water has been added. So, my first question is about characterization. I'm wondering if in the feasibility study or the recommendations from EPA, if more characterization is going to be required, being that the contamination is outside of, under the footprint where it was originally thought to be. Now it has moved very much under the airlock. And I'm wondering, since we've only done it on the north side of the building, if more characterization is gonna need to be done towards the river on the, I guess, the east side of the building.
So when we found the hotspot in August of 2022, actually additional characterization was done, on the northeast, south and west, that went through March of 23. So that's why, part of why it took so long, for DOE to make a decision. So from August 2022 to March 23, we had the vertical borings on the north, west and south. About 12 of them, if I recall correctly, that were done to see if there's any contamination going in those directions. And there was nothing above 1 hour per hour, although one spot on the south east side was close to 1 hour per hour on the outside of B cell, which is still well below the 1,000 hour per hour, but we weren't expecting 1 hour per hour there. So that just adds to the uncertainty. And then March of 23, we gave all that data to PNL. They did some additional model characterization on the outside of B cell. That gave us better understanding of the waste site, obviously. And that's where we said, okay, it's larger than we thought. Components in the building are failing. Let's reevaluate. Did I get all of your question?
You did.
Okay.
And then my second question is, there's a lot of confusion about how this building is classified at this point. That's a Cat 2 nuclear facility. Is it cold and dark? Is it min safe? What is the foreseeable future for the workforce there because there's different requirements as far as if it's min safe operations or if it's cold and dark or if it's a D&D facility.
Great question.
There's a lot of confusion.
So right now, it's an operating Cat 2 nuclear facility, and that there's different hazard categories, and as a 2, it's got certain safety requirements that we have to meet, especially when it comes to filtering the air, the type of maintenance done. So right now it's operating Cat 2. In talks with EPA, we said if we go cold and dark, there are certain parts of the facility that aren't being used, and just to have the workforce given something to do out there. And those parts of the facility that do not impact remote excavation, such as an SMF and other areas, they're doing asbestos removal or hazmat removal, which gets those parts of the facility ready for cold and dark D&D. But EPA says you are not allowed to impact any of the systems that are required for remote excavation. So for at least those parts, it will not be cold or dark. It will still be operating as Cat 2 nuclear facility.
Thank you.
All right.
I guess I just need some clarification. This is not true waste, right? It's radionuclides, but not transuranic.
And that's a good question. So it's mainly cesium and strontium. However, there is some plutonium and americium. So when I believe it was the strontium that was utilized, had some plutonium and americium contamination in it. It wasn't as pure as the cesium. So there is some of that got down into the soil. And 2 soil samples were taken back in around 2010 timeframe. And the only facility we could send those to, because they were so hot, to analyze was the 325 building, very convenient because it's right across the street. And the levels of americium, plutonium, and other radionuclides were low enough to where it shows it's below. It's not true. However, I always caveat that with we're still sampling, we still have to check before it goes to orbit.
And that's my follow-up question, that policies and procedures would change between the 2 classes of radioactive material. Who, from a safety perspective, who manages that? Is it EPA or is it ecology or is it a combination? Maybe the other agencies could speak to that as well.
Who manages which portion?
Well, who approves the disposition, I guess, is the question.
Okay, that's, so DOE has to develop a waste profile for the soil. Where in which we say, there's these radionuclides in it. Here's our evaluation for why we think it's safe and appropriate to go to ERDF. And that is something EPA does weigh in on because they do have that authority to where that's not appropriate for ERDF based on, we don't agree with your evaluation or you did this wrong. They can weigh in on that and tell us whether or not it's appropriate.
Okay, and how is that determined? Does your agency determine that or?
Yeah, and, so it would be, you're talking about like the nitty-gritty, like who actually evaluates that, or? Yeah, so it would be a combination of the, remedial project manager, in this case, it would be like Amy McCartney, reviewing it alongside with some of our folks in Seattle, who specialize in radiation. And, but what we would do, we would evaluate it and then, confer or not confer with DOE's interpretation, or not interpretation, evaluation on that waste profile.
Thank you, guys, in the public record.
That one, I'm not sure if all the waste profiles go into the admin record. Yeah, go ahead.
So if I understood you correctly, the 1000 R was found 13 feet below the hot cell.
So
Reading the newest.
I should have said 11 feet below the hot cell for the 1000 R per hour, then at 13 feet, it went down to 725 R. And then below that, it drastically dropped off, which can happen in the soil.
How deep are you expecting to dig?
The focus feasibility study will cover that, but we're planning for well below, just as, because when you have to do a cost estimate and you don't, let's say you don't assume deep enough, you may have to redo your cost estimate and then go back out for public comment. So we're assuming well below that, not down the groundwater, but much deeper. I just don't want to give a number without having DOE and EPA a chance to weigh in.
Okay. My other question is, I'm assuming you had to lay off workers when you stopped work and you're reevaluating. I know there's some work still going on. But in terms of ramping up again, once an option is chosen, are you worried about being able to find workers to do the work at 324?
Yeah, so I can't speak to any of the layoffs just because I'm not involved in that portion of the project anymore on the document side. But in terms of ramping up, I know we have to train additional people to do that. I know even during my work at the 324 building, we were running short on RCTs, which are the people that check for radiation, making sure things are safe. We did have to train some additional classes of RCTs. not just at 324, but for additional projects. So it's a process we've been through before. Radiological control technician. So those are the amazing experts that keep us all safe, and when I touch stuff I shouldn't, they check to make sure I'm okay. Sure.
Yeah, so I'm also on RCT.
Oh, great.
But,
Thank you, by the way.
so I just want to make sure I'm understanding correctly.
Mhm.
If option two is selected, and it sounds like there's momentum behind option two, the demolition of the existing structure will be done in containment or open air?
That'll have to be evaluated. Right now, it may be open air. We've done that before. However, we don't have a design for that, an approved design. So that's one of the big discussions that'll happen, in the future.
Okay, because my concern is, as far as the RAD goes, there's a lot of trepidation around dose rates and contamination, and you say R and people get nervous, but I can monitor that in real time. I'm also very concerned about the other industrial hazards that are associated with doing this demolition in a building that has more than just radiological contamination concerns. And when you say a mile from town is creeping up towards 324 with the townhouses along the river, the type of apartment complex. More and more workers are like setting up shop in the office complexes. So what can be done to protect members of the public from those other concerns? Because that we don't see in real time.
And that's a great point. So as was being asked, when you bring a facility to, cold and dark, part of that process is hazmat removal. So what can be done to protect people? Well, you want to remove the hazard or as many hazards as you can before demolition. So asbestos removal, which can be flooding. That has to be, for the friable and whatnot, have to be removed after it's fixed. I think there's some exclusions in place, but as much work can be done, to remove some of those chemicals and other hazards before demolition is done.
There's a history on site with demolition projects where it's kind of like that forgiveness versus ask permission approach.
In terms of the safety precautions, or, okay.
Wrong, I'm gonna do a two check. You, Ed and Tom.
I have two questions. One would be for the policy and the other is my materials engineer. First one is this being reviewed by the Defense Nuclear Safety Review Board?
The NFSB,
Yes.
I would assume they'll be involved, they were involved in the previous design. And then they'll likely be pulled, so we have been briefing them even beforehand on the plan to, change the approach. I personally don't know when they'll be pulled into the current effort for, hey, we've got our focus feasibility, study done when we get there. But it would likely be around when the draft A has at least gone through EPA sometime after that point.
I found, once we get their buy-off on certain things, designs and et cetera, things are a lot easier, I find.
Yes, and that was part of the reason, the design took a little bit longer is, from what my predecessor told me, just working with the DNFSB, additional comments, concerns, levels of conservatism, which I think are definitely warranted. So I always appreciate it when an outside entity who specifically deals with a lot of this weighs in, just safety, number one priority.
Okay, now the materials. So, we invented fixators a long time ago. Okay, and we had all kinds of activities involved in the solidification of waste, solidification of environmental sites, uranium tailings, et cetera. It seems like we're missing some of the lessons learned there. For example, a good application for the soils rich in silica is the plasma spray vitrification process. There's also the PNL in situ vitrification. That you put an anode on each side, you charge it up, and you get a glass bulb. Yeah, you got some off gas, but those things need to be worked through. So, all I see is brute force, cranes and shovels and
things of that sort, and we know they cause dust and things of that sort. Even the polymeric, fixators are being used in concretes now. So, isn't there a window open for looking at those kind of technologies? You know, the stuff that P and L did on, plasma spraying for vitrification. That might be a very suitable fixture for a column of sand to condense into a vitrified state that can be safely transported and either sent to waste or wherever. So my question is why isn't there any room for the last 15 or 20 years of technology development in the area?
And I will say that's a perfect question to weigh in on with the focus feasibility study, for the proposed plan as well, when that goes out for comment. And I will say, Jeff, do you remember if the previous alternatives analysis factored in, that alternative that Rob was talking about, where where you essentially withdrew the level of silica, make a big glass chunk? I don't recall specific, or I couldn't remember, but they're all RTD based. So there was a previous alternative analysis done that was pretty thorough, back in the, I want to say 2015 timeframe, but I apologize, I can't remember if that one's in there. If it is in there, we would likely, point to that when we respond, if you do make that comment.
Right.
But otherwise,
Right. Yeah, I know, P&L technology has been spun on to an outfit that has been, taking care of PCB waste sites, localized areas underneath transformers or whatever, where the PCBs are leaked. They gotta be cleaned up, stick their anodes in. Okay. And then it can be removed safely. So,
and I will say on that one, at least for 324, you're saying brute force. I agree, it is pretty brute force, but it's also standard, to the work that we do here. So we tried, and it's still out there as an option, going through the building, using those old systems, kind of a unique approach, quite complex, but, engineered. Okay, option 2, that's kind of our much simpler. We're used to this. We know we can do it. Do we want to try another very engineered approach, on a waste site with these dose rates? But it's definitely a comment for us to respond to.
All right, Matthew, then Ed. So this particular waste site, constituents that are there, how long-lived are these particular radioactive? So like in 100 years or 1,000 years, like where's the rest of something?
So these are quite short-lived. So 30 years, if we were to wait, could we do nothing with this? Essentially, if we demo the building, put a protective cap on and wait, 100, 200, 300 years. That's one way to deal with it. It would decay to very low levels. However, I'll bring us back to the point of there was a lot of politically and from the public, hey, you guys are right north of town. Do you really want to leave that in the soil? So even now there's been resistance from DOE to want to go down that approach, even though it would be achievable.
Okay, but in order, it sounds like the risk is going to be very short-lived being disposed there.
Correct, yes. And Erdif, for those that are newer, that's our CERCLA landfill in the middle of the site. It's a lined landfill. So it's where a lot of our radioactive contaminated debris goes.
They got to see it earlier this week.
Oh, perfect. That's right. And you guys got to, was it WTP you guys got to go into as well with the melters? I'm a little jealous. Okay.
Should have come along.
I know, next time.
Yeah, Ed, Tom, then Chris. Ed, go ahead.
Just one counter comment, the addition of new technology, I totally agree with you, but things that add energy into the soils, would be counterproductive because it creates a whole new level of risk in like the in situ vitrification process. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but I was following it all along until they had the what do they call it, significant deprivation, where it actually exploded in place, so that was it for that, so. Just applying a new technology can have its own risks above and beyond what we're trying to resolve too, so. I'll come with that.
So comment, about town creeping closer to the site, reminded me when we were on the site tour, there's a brand new P&L building right in the park, almost in the parking lot of 324. How does that fit in with now the design? Does the proposed plan and feasibility study have to take into account the fact that there's gonna be people working in that building right next door?
So demolition plan, so right now the waste site, it's, it's in a good configuration, even if we go with option one, pulling out those containers, we've got a special laydown room for those materials, so they can go to ORDA. But that's always carried as a part of the design and the design risk of we're operating right next to 325. We need to coordinate with them to make sure that what we're doing doesn't affect their safety basis or operations. So yeah, the vicinity and who we're operating around does impact things. Typically, you also have a demolition boundary and also a boundary that we'll be excavating. So that would factor into the design that we have and the structure we build for when we tackle the waste site remediation under both option 1 and 2.
Chris?
When it comes to cleanup, I tend to think in terms of concentrations rather than dose rates. So I believe at a previous briefing, the presenter indicated that a number of physical samples were taken and sent to analytical laboratories, but he didn't know what the results were. And I'm wondering if those are available yet, and if you can tell us maybe what some of the concentrations are for cesium and strontium. If you happen to know those.
I'll have to take this, put that down as a question for the specifics. Maybe we can cover that at the full board briefing. But I can say I don't remember the concentrations, but I do remember for the samples that were taken during the structural mods, there's typically a ratio between the cesium to strontium that we find, since those two are mixed in the solution. And typically the deeper you go, the less cesium you have because it binds to the soil. And what we found in one of the samples of the hotspot was there was actually higher levels of cesium than the strontium, which was a cause for concern because it should have been the opposite, which is why we have that level of uncertainty and want greater flexibility for how we approach this. But yeah, sorry, I don't remember the exact concentrations, but I do remember that being a point of interest for where it just shows we need greater flexibility in how to remediate that, just because it doesn't match the typical findings that we had for the ratio of cesium to strontium in the soil.
Yeah, because when you mention 1,000 R, I'm not sure what that means in terms of curies per gram or something like that. Because there's a fairly extensive modeling that goes on to convert R to concentrations.
You're right.
At that time, that's the end of the queue. Do you have any closing thoughts, Tom?
Can I ask is there a defining report number or something that's been available to the public that we can follow this? Maybe the chemical analysis report or some sort of discussion report or alternative report, something that's more recent than, 2022.
That'll be, our focus feasibility study is what'll have a lot of kind of that public presentation of here's our data, here's what we have and what we believe are the alternatives. So no, there's nothing right now that I'm aware of. I'll even extend that out to Jeff. I don't think we've had anything in public a lot, but yeah, right now it's been, we're putting everything in the focus feasibility study and the proposed plan for public consumption.
Not even a data sheet or anything?
We typically send those out.
All right, thank you.
Thanks for the conversation and this backstory. I feel like we're all gonna be ready next month to be three twenty-four experts when we go into that discussion, and that foundational information is really great. I will say, this committee and the rep before us, have always been looking for that document that explains how much water can go into three twenty-four to prevent contamination spread. But I don't think we ever got that, so, hopefully that's in the focus feasibility study, not just by reference, but actually, a link to that document, so it's publicly available. But yeah, thank you.
Yep, and if there's any questions that you guys have ahead of the full board briefing, please feel free to provide those to Lindsay, and I'll see if that's something we can incorporate. I'm getting close to my deadline for when I've got to finish the presentation, set it for upper level review, but I'll definitely try to incorporate as many questions as I can to make sure I've got the data that you're looking for.
Thanks, Ben.
Thank you.
Like we're at break.
Something you want when the on cameras are on. So the next phase of this meeting is committee discussion on a couple different things. So if we can take the side conversations into the hall. Very good, thanks. Because we had a meeting without any PowerPoint slides, I put together some. So it's just. In our work plan, we have, the agencies have asked us to, come up with advice on risk communication. And so I figured what we should do is figure out what the request means to us and then ask the agencies to clarify and, sort of make sure that we're all talking about the same thing, because I know when I think of risk, I think of something different than everyone else in the world, because everyone has different risk tolerance, right? So let's go to the next slide. Here's the advice we were requested to potentially do. And it is, how can the department more effectively communicate and educate the public on the manner in which the department defines and manages risk to the workforce and the community as we clean up the environment? It's a pretty broad topic. And so what I'd like us to do in this little bit is talk through what we think that means. So we can give to Lindsay an idea of what we think that means. So if it's something different than what the agencies are looking for, they can make sure when they do come talk to us, they are clear as to where they think this would go. Obviously, they're not going to change our advice or influence our advice, but just some steering questions, some framing questions that we can do to understand where exactly this statement is coming from. So the next slide, we don't have this talk scheduled yet. And we had a last minute agenda change for this meeting, so I figured this would be a good sort of work session we could do without, since we have the time blocked. And yeah, so we're trying to get the TPA agencies the advice they requested. If we can align what we think they want and what they want, that would be great. But we need to have a conversation early. So next slide. So risk, this is the Webster's Dictionary version of risk, and it's a noun and a verb, and the noun has like 6 different definitions and the verb has 3 or so. So just wanted to set the stage here because risk is a hard thing to put a finger on. Depending on what science you're in, whether you're a financial risk, and insurance risk, ecological risk, perceived risk. In agriculture, perceived risk is risk. If someone's afraid that the water is dirty, then the water is dirty because they're not going to drink it, even if it isn't. So the next slide, I want to do a whiteboard and sort of just no cue, just everybody shout out what you think of as risk. So, wow, that's cool.
And we'll take about it.
And I didn't print out my slides, so there were some actual questions on there too, so we'll jump into them. Yeah.
Question was, what risk needs to be communicated to you and your interest? What is important for you to know?
Okay, fair.
I think that, the way risk is presented in the class you take to get a badge in the Hanford site is very clear. And so I would suggest going through those questions with the committee, to see how it's analyzed by you.
Okay, so, for those of you who haven't had a badge at the Hanford site, there's a class that you take on sort of radiation basics and what the different alarms on the site mean. And so that's a radiation and Hanford risk, right? Okay, so that's,
What do you worry about if you're in Hanford?
right, so that's a badging radiation risk. We can call that on the whiteboard. That's definitely a component for sure. Rob?
I think where risk is really gonna hurt us, and we do have a problem, is the over exaggeration. And for example, I think it's, totally wrong to, all this commotion concerning the transportation of secondary low-level waste that's been processed. I think it's just silly to be calling it high-level waste from a high-level waste tank. And I've seen that over and over and over again. And, I think it needs to be clearly communicated what we're talking about.
So
And
I'm gonna pause you for a second because everyone has a different risk tolerance and a different perception of risk. And no one's reality is silly. And I want to make sure that we're keeping this, because that could be construed as an attack on some individuals, and I don't want that to be part of this conversation. But actually quantifying risk is hard.
My point is that we do need to define it because we run into traps just like that.
Yeah.
Where it sounds like, oh, you have a motive or whatever. But again, in the engineering sense, it's risk of what? You define the what, then you can define the risk. And you can't just define the risk of the blue. What's the risk of life? What's this?
Right.
You know, it's like the doctor. Thank you in the butt, puts a stamp.
So for engineering, that's an engineering safety factor risk, yeah? Is that what you're?
It's risk. You have to define what the risk.
Okay, so engineer's risk, we'll put as a.
Okay.
Josh is getting a cue over there.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we have two people waiting online. We have Dan and then Jim, and then we'll have Sheer, Chris, Ed.
I tried to go queue list, but I guess we'll have to go queue. All right.
Go ahead, Dan.
Good morning. I just came off a 7-year stint on the Hanford Advisory Board, and now I'm a public member. And the DOE and other agencies have used the word risk in various different ways: risk to budget, risk to schedule, and then risk to biota or the environment. And sometimes it's very hard to tell which risk they're talking about. And risk to schedule and risk to budget can result in risk to the environment. But we could advise the agency that when they're talking about risk, to define exactly the kind of risk they're talking about, so it'll be clear what they're saying. They could just get that out in front. That would be great.
So,
thank you.
Dan, would it be safe to summarize that as project risk and environmental risk as two separate bullets?
Yes.
Yes, and project risk can result in environmental risk, but environmental risk is how much of a risk, and what is society willing to tolerate in terms of risk, and how much. And that basically gets down to how much do you want to spend to save how many people's health or life. And so there's a value that's put on that risk. And when they design, when they define radiation limits, that value comes into play. And so we need to be clear about what value we're using on present and future human life or health.
Jim.
Anyway, it's an amorphous, it's a very amorphous subject. It's hard to define. Thank you.
Hi, yeah, it really is. Um, Relative risk is really more important because we really define risk versus everyday life. Like what's riskier, this, or is there a background risk, which there is. I mean, the risk of dying just in general is like 1 in 100,000, just being alive. So if some risk, if you could kind of figure that risk out, which I think it is like a 1 in 100,000, if that if the risk you're talking about is below the background risk, then it really is nothing. I mean, there's a kind of a zero risk. We love numbers and we tend to get all bound up in numbers, but if the risk of just being alive exceeds whatever risk you're talking about, then it's below background.
Yeah, so perspective, so relative risk is an important, metric. Even if it's quantified, you still need to have it relative to a baseline of some kind.
So, sharing a room.
Okay, so for me, I look at it in like the broadest possible term, and I consider risk to be what's the potential harm from a course of action, like at its root. To me, that's risk. And then you have to look at your audience, what is your audience's tolerance for a specific type of risk. But then kind of like to the earlier conversation, you also have to consider the messenger. And the example that I use is, because I grew up here, I remember when Energy Northwest was still whoops, right? And there were some scientists or engineers, I don't know, I was in high school from whoops that came and sat down in one of our classes, and they had this like gallon milk jug with water, and they're like, this is from the cooling tanks, and it's so clean, and there's no risk, and who wants to drink some? And I'm like, no, right? Because I don't trust the messenger. So I think that's something that we have to be cognizant of when we're communicating, what we perceive to be risk. Like, do we understand what the tolerance is for our audience? And do they trust us as the messenger when we present information?
Okay, so, trust, I think, is important. So, trusted source. And, the risk associated with each action, I think are the two that I got. Is that
potential harm from a course of action?
Potential harm from a course of action. That's a good turn of phrase. Thank you. Great.
Okay, so I lost track of you from that point. So we'll jump to Chris.
I'd like to expand just a little bit on what Dan said. One of the major efforts that every company that works for DOE has to go through periodically, every year, every other year, is to complete a risk register. And basically, this is project risk, as you mentioned. What are the chances that your project will fail to meet cost requirements, schedule requirements, or it might fail because of technical failures? And when you look at things like the life cycle report or the 10-year plan, or plan 10 for whatever, and they talk about risk, they're talking about project risk. They're not talking about risk to the environment or risk to the people. It's that your project will not meet schedule, cost, or technical obligations. And that's a major category of risk. The other one, and Roberto can expand on this, is a typical risk that you do in a baseline risk assessment or other risk assessments as an integral part of CERCLA, the remedial investigation, the feasibility study, and it's even brought into the proposed plan. And this is a risk that you'll exceed a certain level of probability to get cancer from exposure, given different scenarios, to contamination or risk to the environment. For example, salmon, salmon not being able to spawn properly, the eggs will die. And so that's the kind of risk. And then the third one is risk, I think that Cheryl was talking about, which is more immediate exposure. Or as we just heard at 324, what is immediate risk to us from radiation? That's not a long-term thing. We're not talking about cleanup spanning decades or maybe exposure spanning years. It's maybe exposure in the order of minutes or hours. What's the risk to us of dying and that kind of risk? So I think the three categories of risk that we can talk about. I think the question is how we frame those, each of them in a couple sentences, to transmit them upward.
So, human health and the environment, risk to human health and the environment covers the sort of the EPA side, if I can speak for EPA. Because, yeah, there's a lot more risk contamination wise at the site than just radionuclides, right? So are we just talking about, things we can't see, or are we talking about hexavalent chrome and diesel fuel and all that?
And most of our groundwater remediation is not for radionuclides, it's for chemicals.
Right.
So I think everybody should be familiar with the ICRP, the International Radiation Commission. They calculate the risk of the radiation category. Okay, and what we've done there. They also have separate subcommittees which evaluate the hazards with performing work in those radiation areas. So, that's a reference that people should be aware of. There's no commission on radiation.
So may I challenge that a little bit? You really need to be looking at the National Committee of Right Protection. There is divergence starting to happen between the ICRP and the NCRP, and I'm working with conversion. Right now, the go-to is the national standard, not the international. I work from the international.
So we were the DOE standard.
Yeah.
So Tom, the question that was asked is what risk needs to be communicated to you and your interest? What's important for you to know? Where do you want to go from here?
We have a couple folks in queue, and then we'll jump to the next couple slides, because
Okay.
there's lots more to talk about.
So I'm gonna use this whole interaction as a case in point, and I'm employee, right? I'm supposed to be non-bargaining unit, non-management. And there are a lot of people that work on site who are not RCTs, who are not NCOs, that they are office workers or they're janitorial staff. And you start talking to them about refer to this organization for this standard, and then you argue about which organization has the more relevant standard. That means nothing to me. And even when we talk about RAD versus concentration, do you know the difference between dose rate versus contamination? What does that mean to you? You need to communicate it in a way that makes sense. Not just to other people that have a scientific background, but to the public at large and to the workforce at large. Because not everybody has that same background. And one of the things that never ceases to surprise me on site is how many people that have the badge are actually really afraid of working around radioactive material.
So plain language communication.
Yes.
That's important. I would say for my interest, it's important that we communicate that the water in the Columbia is safe. And how it's changed over time. That's a lot of Oregonians make their livings with water from the Columbia in irrigation, and so we need to make sure that the food is safe, and how we can take DOE's message that everything's safe and EPA's and ecology's regulatory oversight, and make sure that's big for Oregon.
Micro recreation and on top.
Yeah, recreation.
Risk always has a negative connotation. You can't do anything with it except the negative connotation. And we're supposed to look at this from the DOE perspective. DOE would never put out an announcement that said, we're gonna tear down 324 building and the risk of cancer is 1 in 500,000 along the river corridor, because that would never happen. So we never report risk, I think. And the public, at least the public I'm familiar with, considers Hanford an extreme risk. And you really have to sell something else, or you won't do anything. Maybe you can't. but Hanford is a phenomenal risk, and people remember this from 2 generations back, when the river water wasn't safe to drink. You know, and the plumes headed towards Spokane. So I think that we need to consider risk, abatement from the perspective of DOE as we go through this.
Yeah, so just to, the, records of decision do include those risk calculations. They're just buried under a lot of the feasibility studies and stuff. So they're there, but you have to really dig. So that, do we have perceived risk on there again already?
So
Before you my glasses.
if you don't mind, I'd like to do like a 2-minute discussion about risk perception, and it's something I've done to other public forums before. And it's kind of a help get everybody in the same.
Can we get through the rest of the whiteboards and then save that for, open forum?
Sure.
Okay.
Rebecca.
So when I think about risk, I think about, just one word comes to my mind, and it's threshold. Right? So, I mean, you could take a whole lot of things in, into consideration. Right?
Yeah.
Take like alcohol, right? I could have 1 sip of alcohol and then probably no risk, right? But if I drink the whole bottle, it's probably gonna have some kind of effect, right? So it's the threshold of, and you can, say the same thing about radiation, chemicals, things like that, how much you're exposed to. But I did want to say also that, our safety basis that, for the Hanford site is, does have those kind of calculations in there as well. For each operating unit on the site, we have to have a safety basis, so.
So yeah, that information is there. It's just, you have to know where to look.
And interpret it.
And interpret, and know what your risk tolerance is and all these things. Okay, so let's move away from risk for a second. Because there's other pieces of this question that need some thought and definition, I think. And this is the first time we've ever tried to do a whiteboard and the PowerPoint at the same time. So Josh is like inventing new, presentation methods.
And bringing up that PowerPoint again.
All right, so we want to go, and move on to the next part of the request from the agencies. And we want to talk about, how the department can talk effectively about risk to the community, right? So let's look at the community. One more. Community is another one of those things. It has a lot of definitions. There's, the have is a community. The nation is a community, the region is a community, the, Quad Cities are a community, workforce is a community. So same sort of whiteboard, let's go to the next one. Not the whiteboard, just yet. There's community keeps on going. There's a whole lot of definitions. So what community needs to be informed about the risk, or lack of risk from Hanford? And then, I don't think we're gonna get to the follow-ups because this is such a, everybody's engaged and that's awesome. So, next whiteboard is what community needs to be talked to. I'll throw out, Congress.
Repeat the question. What was it?
What community needs to be informed about the risk of Hanford?
Workers.
Okay, where we got loading, but, it's working.
Computer test limit, finding these physically.
It's working, but, yeah. Lesson learned, have 2 computers next time. So.
Have Congress and workers.
Oh, obviously, anybody who lives here.
Okay, so, and here, we're defining as what?
I think that's an interesting question, but, the Hanford region, I'll just use that as a coverall term for. But actually, that might depend upon the type of hazard, right, that, we're discussing at the moment.
Yeah,
Something
so,
that's airborne has a different community than something that's waterborne.
right, if you look at the map on the National Park Service map of where deposition from the Green Run happened, it went from Idaho to California.
Yeah.
And everywhere in between. So, the Northwest is a region, the Columbia Basin, or Columbia River Basin. But really, I think,
Hey, Tom.
yeah.
Community is critical. There are many communities, but the messenger. You go back to the other part of it, in trust. You know, I used to work for Franklin County, and part of my job was to communicate the risk from a nuclear power plant accident to the owners of the farm. People who administer the city of Pasco, people who happen to live in the emergency planning zone. Also having to figure out the best means of informing our citizenry. Again, so the messenger, it's important, the messenger. If you're talking to a group of PNL, PhD type, there's someone who's going to communicate with them more effectively than say a knuckledragger like me with 2 bachelor's degrees, right? If you're talking to peaceful farm workers, you probably don't want your messenger with you. You have to have the trust. So the community, it's not just a community, it's who's going to be best to communicate with them.
And in that statement, I heard 3 different communities mentioned, maybe even 4. You already caught the administrative and emergency planners. There's the scientific community. And the regulatory community. Because the regulators are a community.
Might throw forth with insurers.
Insurance, ooh, that's risk. All right, we have a few and Josh is typing in, so. Yeah, I think Pam, and then I'm learning names. Sure, okay.
For 25 years, my job was executive director of the Hanford Communities, and it was my task to keep the elected officials of 4 cities and 2 counties informed about what was going on in Hanford, so that they could interact with their constituents. They could respond to questions, and they understood how to engage in issues that they particularly cared about. I was also liaison from Benton County to the Federal Emergency Operations Center. So it was my task to inform the technical people dealing with emergencies about how the community functions and how information that was needed by the community so that all of those people could do their jobs. So this is extraordinarily complex. And, DOE has asked us to do this, but I mean, it's just brainstorming. I don't think we can draw conclusions.
Yeah. And I think what my goal here is to have this brainstorming session so the TP agencies can see where we can think of these things. And so when they come, they can be laser focused on what they're actually asking for. Yeah. Wait, sure.
Well, I was gonna say also, displaced community, specifically thinking about like the aftermath, right? There's people that lost their land, there's farmers that lost their property. And so there are gonna be interests that wanna know what's happening to remediate the footprint.
That's the tribal nations, the folks that got displaced by the construction of the Mexican project, environmental justice communities in general. Yeah. I know, it feels even start.
So, yeah, Simone and Chad also contributed tribal communities. Just wanted to note that Dan Solis also had a comment. It's a little hard to see on the screen.
Okay, let's go Dan and then Rob. And then Jim.
Okay, thank you. I remember the Purex tunnel collapse, and then there were the fugit radionuclides at the Purex cleanup, and both got international attention, particularly from consumers of agricultural products in the area. So that's a community that we need to consider.
The press.
And it's well, yeah, the press. There was a television crew from Germany that showed up at one of the meetings, I think, spurred on because of the collapse of the Purex tunnel. So yeah, there's an international community of consumers of agricultural products from the area, and also, is it true that the tribes have been asked to limit their consumption of salmon from the Columbia because of biological accumulation? I've heard that, but I don't know if it's true.
But not now.
As subsequent studies have been done to show it's wrong. Just don't bottom fish right at the bottom of the dam.
Okay, so yeah, risk ripples, communication of risk ripples through generations, and a clear message and a trusted messenger is important. Seems like something that, Rob, you're next.
Well, there's a population of college students that ought to be listed as a community. Because they're kind of their own little network.
Academia?
No, not academia.
Not academia.
I mean, these are the people paying for the education.
Okay, so we don't include students in academia, but
Yeah, I think some of us professors are worthless. The other thing I was going to say, is that there's also a community people don't want to know.
So,
And they just don't want to know. They don't care. It doesn't cross their mind, their thought process daily at all. Et cetera.
so we've got academia and students.
Okay.
And then I don't, okay, how do we want to say this? Willfully uninformed,
Uninterested.
uninterested, yeah, that's good, yeah.
Well, throughout my career, this has always been a really tough question, is risk and how to define it. I won't find a whole demonstration right now. But the thing is, you will get people off the street, point you to it, they'll come up to you and say, hey, is the Hanford site safe? Yes or no? And then how do you explain to them that it is safe or whatever your opinion is? And it gets to be very difficult because scientists, engineers, people, technicians like this, we tend to go through, I will tell you, I've had top-notch scientists say, well, there's a 10 to the minus 6 probability. And they're trying to say that in public, and you have to go out and find it and say, no, it's safe, don't let those numbers. So the whole idea, you know, safety, being safe is the absence of risk. Risk is the lack of safety, so that balancing in your mind what you interpret to other people is really, really the thing to do. And it's really difficult to sit down and talk about it, being honest with your own evaluation of it, but at the same time conveying what it really is in the real world impact to an individual, a company, a state, or something like that. And that is the tough part. Like you always keep saying, it's a perception of risk that is the tough part to get across. So working in a general area of, you know, safety versus risk, just try to keep that in your mind. You know, if somebody asks me, it's safe. Yes, it's safe. It's safe driving in the car. It's your perception of driving in the car.
And I think we skipped Jim, but that's, yeah, the perception of, what community needs to be informed about risk? All of them. And they all need to be told different stories, right? You need the scientists to know, the scientists need to know the numbers.
Right.
The people who don't know the details need to just know, you're not gonna.
The worst thing you do is ask a scientist.
Yeah.
Because they
Yeah.
have time communicating.
Yeah, I would say future generations, right? I mean, our track record, 200 years from now, I mean, we think we're on the right path. They're gonna look back and our track record is they're gonna say, my God, what were those people thinking? I mean, that's, kind of been the way it's played out. When we were down at the WIP, in New Mexico, the fellow that tours around said that there's people around the world that are trying to understand how we can mark that site or these sites 10,000 years from now, or what it looks like for, another civilization. So, I think we have to have the, how we got here, why we are doing what we're doing laid out for those to combine.
Yeah. Risk, communication isn't a now thing. It's, the story has to keep being told or else it gets lost, right? Chris, I think you were in queue.
Yeah, I think Rob had a really good point. There's a significant subset of the population that just doesn't care. And look at all the divisiveness about climate change. And people who believe it's happening, people who don't, but there's significant portions of the population on either side. And I think there are subsets of individuals, and all these categories who really don't care. And the question is, how do you talk about something, or should you even try and talk about something, if you're talking to people who really don't care?
So maybe a part of all the messaging should be, why do I care? Right?
Or you talk about someone, or some into.
Yeah.
Getting into.
So, back to the emergency response thing. Is there something that can happen at Hanford that could impact me as a citizen of this region? And they're having a hard time coming up with accidents because so much has been cleaned up. And as far as I'm concerned, until the cesium and strontium capsules are in those canisters, that's the risk. Because there could be off-site contamination from that, but we're on a good path. And so, a plane flying into something, that's pretty remote, but they're having to stretch that far to come up with something that would get contamination off the site.
I think this conversation might be leveling out. Maybe we can jump back to the slides. I'd like to do 5-10 more minutes on this topic and then touch on the other bit, which is the issue manager team. Okay. Okay, so the last bit of this is, how do we communicate risk as we clean up the environment? I just not quite sure what we're defining as cleaning up the environment. And there's, the risk is moving. It's not necessarily going away. So as you remediate a waste site, you take that dirt that's still contaminated to ERDIC. And so ERDIC becomes a time relief capsule risk. So I guess just some clarification on what cleaning up the environment means in this context.
I still think it's not informing them of the risk, informing them that it's safe. Because people, like you, several of us have been saying up here, risk is a connotation of a negative thing. Safety is a positive connotation that thinks it's safe. Then we can go into explanations of why it's safe. But trying to say, you need to know about this risk versus you need to know why it's safe is an easier thing to communicate.
So something like what Pam was just saying, it's becoming harder and harder to find drill topics that are gonna impact more than the site. That's a really good communication of risk, because they've done a really good job at reducing the really scary stuff down to a couple things.
So I'll kind of add to my comment before, and I think there's an issue of perspective. You know, when the tunnel collapsed or when 324 was announced, those are big items and people absorb those and remember them. But as DOE goes through the remediation process, they're so incremental, they're so tiny advances compared to the big scheme of things that they aren't recognized. And I don't know how you bundle those and say, here's a big deal, you know, with the list. It ain't gonna work for the public. And so it's an issue of perception.
Yeah, I feel like the press doesn't often report on good news stories. They like conflict and scary stuff.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
And there's not often a regulatory requirement to write a report about a good news story. And so I feel like that's a good value of this group, is we give DOE a chance to come in and say, look at this great work we're doing, we've gotten a lot of stuff done, and yeah, we want to hear about the scary stuff too, but we really want to see that how much cleanup has been done safely on the site. You gotta heard it, and it's so full, they need another supercell, and that's all risk that's been removed from the river corridor, and you know, just, so, you know, how, are we talking about risk, and does DOE talk about risk always in the negative, or is there a way that DOE could have more good news stories that get some traction?
In the 5-year plan last night, when you think about what was said, by and large, it was a good news story. Even the work task that's being done, but it was a good news story. And I think maybe that's the vehicle that could be used to convey the good news about safety risk to the public. Because we're talking about work that's been done, work that's gonna be done, we're addressing this, we're addressing that. And they have that category in the 5-year plan called risk reduction. And because that's the category that they talk to, that's further part of a subset of maybe the DOE could expand upon good news about risk.
Chris, thank you for the segue. We are gonna continue this conversation, but next thing on the agenda, before, open forum, is to talk about the cleanup priorities and advice for fiscal 27, which is based on the presentation last night. So, let's wrap up this risk community and framing questions talk, and then we'll jump right in. Future plans for risk reduction. So I saw a hand. Oh, a couple hands. Yeah, let's go to Jim and then.
Oh, I just wanted to mention, we didn't talk about historic risk. When you say, okay, how many people have died from this in the last 100 years or last 50 years? And, you know, in the surrounding area, or whatever, and there hasn't been any. So it's important to say, yeah, we can calculate risk, we can think about it, we can worry about it, but you can actually look at the numbers over the last 50 years and it's like nothing. So historic risk is important.
Thank you.
I was just gonna say, when we start talking about like communicating all the good news stories, I know that there's like this outward focus on the public, but as the employee, you know, there's a lot of low morale on the site. So it's hard to say we're doing all of this stuff when as a worker, you feel like you're just being micromanaged and henpecked. And there is a culture that's very unsettled right now on the site. So it doesn't feel good to be there in this moment. So when you're saying we're doing all this great stuff, keep in mind, there are thousands of people right now that are not happy. I mean, is that an unfair statement?
I think it's very fair.
Yeah, you know, and case in point, like, I know that the primes have to like do some sort of community outreach thing every year. But I'm like, why is CPC Co paying all this money to do free shuttles to the Bend County Fair when they're gonna lay off all these people and access all these workers? Like, it doesn't compute. So there's kind of a disconnect with, you know, what's front facing and then what's happening with the workforce. I mean, there needs to be some sensitivity to that.
And that is another risk, isn't it?
So I just want to encourage you to talk to your union about any type of issues that you may be having.
your comment? Oh. So. Yeah, so when it comes to, what's it, the first people are talking about, like, one thing that. One area where USC2A are, we're not just being it first to tribal members. We're going way deeper than that. And we look at the risk to the ecological communities and the water, the plants, the animals that support the vibrant life here in the Columbia Basin. And so in addition to speaking for the tribal members, we also work to speak for those things that cannot speak for themselves. And so just want to put that out there.
Okay. I think we understand more now that this is a topic that's gonna be very hard to work on advice, as it's currently framed. It's been on the work plan for 2 years now, and I'm trying to make some progress so we can fulfill our mission here. But it's gonna be a heavy lift to find a brief that can encapsulate all of this. The world, I mean, the world is risk. If you exist, you're existing in a risk field, right? And whether you have blinders on and aren't aware of it, or whether you micromanage it and try to quantify it, it's there. So I think it's gonna be a really interesting conversation when we try to focus in a little bit more, and appreciate the conversation, everybody. Last word on risk?
Yeah, last word. Friends of P&L have been writing a book about risk communication. I have a book here, probably in this library, probably available, if I can go away. I just wanted to make you aware of it.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, and wish I had mentioned that.
So maybe PNL should be involved in the briefing that we get on risk
We
communication.
have these two ladies right here.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, but that's the idea. If someone,
Can you pass that to Lindsay?
I sent it to a book that is.
I can pass this around.
Yeah, here you go.
Does that have an executive summary?
I guess my point is, we can educate ourselves a bit about this stuff, because we're literature about risk.
Okay.
So it'll prepare us better to address
Plagiarize our advice.
this advice.
All right, so we've got 10 minutes before open forum, and I think that you can lead into open forum a little bit, because we're sort of having a free conversation. But I wanted to make everyone aware that there is an issue manager team working on advice that we do every year for cleanup priorities. And the way the budget cycle works at Hanford, the advice that we're working on now is the budget that DOE is gonna request for fiscal year 2027. So we're looking 2 years out. Had the 5-year plan meeting last night. And, the only thing listed in fiscal year 2027 under risk reduction is complete construction of environmental restoration disposal facility or Supercell 11. Almost all the budget were items that are important enough to put on this placemat that they put out, is going to the tank waste mission. I feel like this committee should probably, put something in the advice that's, we need to walk and chew gum at the same time, and so Congress needs to get some more money our way being the site. So, just wanted to start that framing question amongst us, to look at the cleanup priorities advice last year, which was advice number
315, I think.
315. Compare that to what's on here. And think by January about what's missing and what's important to you. I also encourage all of you to join the IM, all of you would be a pretty big IM team, but if you're interested at all in joining the IM team, we don't have an issue manager team lead who's going to be writing the advice yet. I'm sort of coordinating, but I'm not gonna be writing it, so, right now I'm a placeholder. But just think about it, and, it's, consistently, we're told that this is the most important advice we produce every year. So, I wanna try to, since the meeting happens to be last night, I wanted to try to get ahead of that. Chris?
Let me add to what Tom said a little bit. I have been involved in this for the last 4 years. Last night in the 5-year plan, I think we heard pretty clearly from the DOE presenters that, especially in the risk reduction in the Central Plateau and along the river corridor, that things were going to be slowed down and might not be addressed or remediated nearly as quick as we might like. This was also in response to a question that Mia had. And what Tom said, money is preferentially going to go to the tank farms and DFLA and construction and design of the high level plant. However, if we think about what Ryan Vance said yesterday, what we present to DOE and the tri-party agencies is important. They might not be able to do it all, but they want to hear it. And so I think even though we may suspect that things might not be funded, that there are other funding priorities, I think it's important that we tell DOE what's important to our constituencies. And if our constituency think that things are important to be done, even though they might not appear on the plan, I think that's important for DOE and the tri-party agencies to hear. And so I think looking forward to that, to our work priority advice, let's not fall in the trap of saying, well, we're gonna essentially regurgitate what's in the 5-year plan. Well, let's think about what's not in the 5-year plan that may be important to our constituency, important to us, things that we've heard and talked about in the past. I think that's just as important as looking at what's in the 5-year plan.
Oh, and this year, it's really easy to look beyond the 5-year plan.
Pardon?
It's really easy for us to look for stuff that's not the 5-year plan this year, because this year in the 5-year plan, the only thing is completion of Supercell 11, which is important. But
Collectively, the HAP has a lot of experience and a lot of knowledge about what's going on at Hanford, about things that we've talked about in the past. And we don't need to be held hostage to what's in the 5-year plan.
Yeah. Excellent.
So what are we doing? I kind of thought that Supercell 11, they're just taking the whole big. You know, it's not like they're taking waste and putting it in it. And so maybe, we can direct our risk discussion towards something that's actually removing radioactive material or hazardous material and putting it someplace where it belongs. And so, yeah, I think that we can expand on this risk reduction in several areas.
And creating a supercell is not a simple task. There's a lot of liners and specs that have to be met, inspected, new buildings to build. So it's not insignificant. Yeah.
But we're not wasting it.
Right.
And yeah, we're building a facility that have a waste.
Yeah.
But again, I think that you know, it may be times that we bring in this plug and play program and that they've been highly successful on and expand upon that from the point of identifying specific risks, you know, hazards and mediating. That sort of thing.
And we've consistently heard from DOE that it's important to keep projects going so you don't lose trained individuals to know how to do that project. So building demolition needs to keep going so you don't lose that institutional knowledge of how to do it safely.
Tom, we learned last night about reduction of risk funding. I think that the advice we write should indicate that should be restored, and the next year or the future year or something. Otherwise, that's gonna be gone and it's gonna be hard to put back in.
I agree, but we can't say anything about money.
We're not saying anything about money, we can say, well, yeah, you can restore reason.
Okay, so I just wanted to step in here really fast.
Yeah.
So as far as the cleanup priorities advice from the department's perspective, what we're looking for is not necessarily what is missing in the 5-year plan, as Chris shared. We're looking at what are those priorities? What are you looking, or what is your constituency looking to see cleaned up, I guess, faster? What's missing? What is it that you would like to see? So,
The danger of budget is not on the table in that respect, is it?
right, we're not looking for budget priorities, we're looking for cleanup priorities. And so, the feedback's important to hear from everybody, so.
The way I look at this advice, and I'm me, so I can't speak for anyone else, is if there was an unlimited bucket, what would you want done that year?
Finish our things.
That's next committee, not this.
So, and I don't know if this has anything to, or a big bearing on it, but like I brought up yesterday when we were at lunch, and I'm not sure that everyone knows it, but, you know, the contracting model for CPC Co is no longer the IDIQ contract, it's a performance-based contract, so how does that play into their priorities and how now, since they don't have like, hey, here's a project, we have to get this done, and then we have to move to this project and this project, how that affects that whole contracting model, performance-based instead of the task-based, how that plays into their priorities.
Well, so for those of you who don't know, we used to have a committee on the board called Budgets and Contracts. And we happen to have the former chair of that committee in the room. So Chris, do you know anything about this, contracting question? And
Well, you asked me about that yesterday, and I looked at the conform contract, DPC code's conform contract with all the mods. As of this morning, it's still called an IDIQ contract,
It's not.
then the contract hasn't been changed. And I'm not sure you can change a contract like that without coming out with only procurement.
Well, it has, because they made an announcement to all the employees.
So I'll take a look, I'll put that question back. I know that we don't have our formal budgets and contracts committee. However, I will get a response to that question.
When did they make the announcement?
When was it, 2 weeks ago?
Then maybe they haven't changed the contract in the online.
I don't want to make any assumptions.
yeah, so
Why not change?
sort of morphing into an open forum style discussion where it's slightly off topic for this committee, but it's tangentially related and, it's important, for sure. But yeah, so.
Yeah,
we're
we're
right
talking about priorities.
We're right on schedule, yes. Priorities and cleanup includes contracting. You know, we need to make sure we have a workforce that is not, that has morale and if there's morale issues, you know, maybe that's a priority because we need to have people want to work at the site and do the work in order for the work to get done.
And before we go anymore, Dan has a comment on mine.
Thank you. There's a risk out there that we haven't talked much about, but it's the getting the high level waste off the site. Savannah has the same problem. They're double stacking their glass now. There's a the Community Alliance put out a link for a GAO report on siting of deep depositories, and there's a glitch in the regulatory system that we might want to start addressing now to try to get it ironed out. And that's that the EPA needs to set standards, but they need a site to set standards too. And this Chevron decision is going to have some influence, I think, over how the EPA or Congress develops the standards for deep geologic repositories. So we're sitting here with a lot of transuranic waste and mixed transuranic waste and pretty soon high level glass. with no place for it to go. And I think it might not be a bad idea to dedicate some part of the budget to sussing this out so that there's a more clear path towards regulating and citing a deep geologic repository. Thank you.
Is there anyone with a legal mind that can define the Chevron decision a little bit better? I could try, but it's probably wrong. But we're solving the open forum now, so.
Well, before we move into open forum and go off into
Okay.
things that are outside of the HAP's, I guess, purview, my question for you is there anybody who wants to sign up to be on the issue manager team? We missed that.
I did. So yeah, if you want to sign up for the issue manager team.
I'll see you in the Highlander.
Oh, you're gonna wait up, you're gonna wait, okay, all right.
I've got a 12:30, so.
Dan, your mic's hot. So Dan signed up for the issue manager team yesterday, I believe. So anyone else? Excellent. We're getting some folks in. I saw Larry as well.
And did anybody want to sign up?
Rob, Larry. And Mia. And we are still looking for issue manager team lead. You got some time. We're just sort of data collecting right now. Chris? Oh, Steph, back in the south. All right.
So would you again, issue management team, what is the focus of, what's the?
So this one is the cleanup priorities advice, and we do it every year where we go to all the different committees and we all throw our advice or our priorities into a hat for 2027. And then the issue manager team lead takes all of those things in the hat and puts them into a cohesive document. Okay, wow, that was the most productive, like 30 seconds, thank you. Okay, so open forum, now is the time where we would talk about whatever. We already have a request to do an exercise to talk about risk, and I think that's awesome, let's do that. And then maybe we can figure out what the Chevron decision means
Can you just summarize what it is?
I can try. So the Supreme Court last term overturned a principle that's been in place since 1920 or so, I think, called the Chevron deference. And that means that the experts in the agencies have sort of the final say on interpreting vague language from Congress. So EPA gets to interpret the rules from Congress, and they have a little bit of protection from lawsuits because they're the EPA and they're the experts of how that works. So DOE, as the regulator of radionuclides for the defense waste, had deference for their orders and rules. They don't anymore. Now, if there's a question that has to go up through the federal court system, and the federal judge is going to be the one who makes a determination whether the rule is legal and appropriate with Congress or not. So it's a big deal, and it's gonna have some ramifications for sure. I'm not a lawyer, I'm not a geologist, but that's, it's one of the things I was tracking, and so I hope if there's any lawyers on the phone, if I did it wrong, let me know. But yeah, so that's Chevron deference, and it got overruled, overturning 100 years of precedent.
That's my understanding of it too.
Excellent. Yeah. So big news.
That's gonna fill up the court.
It is absolutely going to slow things down and fill up the court. And you're going to have to. There's going to be judges without background knowledge determining the definition of high level waste.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. That's where I think it's most implications for Hanford, personally.
Probably constructively.
Maybe. Okay. Open forum. We got a risk talk for a couple minutes. Floor is yours.
Let me go ahead. So I would like for all of you to look up the city, right above you is 1,000 pounds. 1,000 pounds, right? And it's held by a rope. That rope is rated to hold 2,000 pounds. So we have a risk, and we have to take a look at this risk. Well, let's say we take this rope and we change it out for one that's only rated for 1,500 pounds. The risk just went up, right? Because of the probability that would break, manufacturing things and all that. So now let's take that same rope and take it down to 1,100 pounds. Okay, a risk continues to go up as we keep reducing that. Then all of a sudden we have a rope that's only rated at 1,000 pounds and it's holding 1,000 pounds. Risk is pretty high at this point because variances, and weight measurements, and the rope tolerances and all that. What happens if we go to a 900 pound? Well, now it's beyond a normal risk. It's considered a high risk because the possibility of breaking is intimate. So what does that mean to you? What's going to happen when that rule breaks?
You're gonna die.
Really? I left out a very important factor. I never told you what that 1,000 pounds was. I got 1,000 pounds of feathers. So the consequences of the risk is just as important as the probability. So if that rope breaks, yeah, I get covered in feathers. I'm allergic to feathers, so a little higher risk for me. So risk is three things: probability of occurrence, consequences of that occurrence, and the risk tolerance, how they can rope to be able to happen. So when you talk to people, it's got to be, that's what we do, and particularly for us health businesses, it's the consequence of what's happening is just as important as the probability of it actually occurring. So that's my model I use when people, national forums, I've been asked, well, is it safe or not? Can we have it in your power plant? You got to learn to be very careful about mortality rates, morbidity rates, do your safety statistics and all that. And you got to be able to make a decision for the public or the workforce to say, yes, it's safe. If you want more information, I'll go through the minutia details with you. But they're just asking a question. You're the expert. Is it safe? Yes or no? And you got to talk to them. So that's my model. That's my demonstration.
You didn't say how old the ropes were.
Huh?
You didn't say how old the other ropes were.
The other ropes? Oh, I don't care. I hear. I just want the one that's over.
How old the rope is? How old the rope is? When was it rated? That's a, yeah.
All those factors.
Yeah.
Is this an ASME rope?
Thank you. That was.
Yeah. So now this is all the scientists and engineers talking, right? Yeah. For the average person, just a world.
This is a good example of making a risk communication meaningful, expressing it in meaningful language. And you can use a metaphor to do that.
Yeah, that was great. Thank you. Chris, what's on your mind?
I took a quick look at that risk communication book that's been going around, looked at the table of contents. And in many of the chapters, the word legal appears, in association with risk. Essentially, what are the legal consequences, the legal community, so on and so forth. We actually never mentioned that, but that word legal appears as some chapters and many of the chapters in that book right there. I just thought I'd bring that out because we didn't talk about anything about that.
Do we think legal fits in the project risk?
Well, and your definition of Chevron, things are gonna go up to courts. That'll risk have the legal connotation there too.
Well, before you talk about the risk communication book, maybe you should read the crucial conversations book. I mean, how far back do we want to go? This guy talks about Franklin County, I think of downwind or some. This man talks about the tribes, I think of how are we going to keep the sacred burial grounds safe? I come from the safety world. What's the biggest risk for a Hanford worker? Oh, they preach anybody that's been on for more than 2 days knows slips, trips, and falls, and then we can go to the other extreme to terrorism. And we didn't talk about, really didn't talk about that. I think maybe a plane flying into a tank, we don't know the probability of most of those. So it's so broad, we could be here for days.
And cybersecurity.
Oh, yeah. There you go.
Yeah, and then some of the work culture of the site, and we talk about the mental health workers, and being able to go home and foster a family environment that's positive as well. It's hard to go home and switch gears, and it affects the community in general too. I mean, there's a lot of cases.
Funny thing that you mentioned the slips, trips and falls, because it seems to be like, yeah, it's like the flavor of the day, every day, slips, trips and falls. And, yeah, I've been on site for, 38 years, and the 2 times that I've ever been injured on the site was a chemical exposure in the tank farms back in 2014. And, we work around high levels of radiation. And then the second time I was ever hurt was a slip and fall on the ice, at work. So, all those years of working with high level nuclear waste and high dose rate, areas, yeah, that's how I got hurt.
And DOE did not back you up, they said you're in the parking lot, it's your own fault.
What did she say? What did you say?
I said that if it's in the parking lot, DOE looks at that accident differently, and it needed a challenge for you. If you had slipped in the building, it would have been a different fault.
Yeah, that's a whole other, that's a whole other ball for that chick.
I will not speak to that on behalf of the department, so.
So we do have, thermal risk, especially in the summer months, we have to limit the amount of work going on out in the sun.
Yeah, heat risk
That's, heat stroke and other things, yeah.
and climate risk. Significant changes to precipitation amounts could impact the design of the caps. They're over-engineered a lot, but eventually you get to a point where you're not rated for that amount of rain all at once, and things are gonna get more flashy. Yeah.
Well, and then also risk of complacency. I mean, like Pam was saying, you're running out of emergency scenarios because there's not much left on site. But the fact of the matter is, the stuff that is left on site is no longer the low hanging fruit. We talked about yesterday, or Brian Vance mentioned, so many buildings have been like removed from the Hanford footprint. Well, it's like, where did my bathroom go? When in 2009, you had all these trailers everywhere. And you get credit for removing all of these office trailers or bathroom trailers, like all the low hanging fruit at Hanford is gone. And as far as the complacency and the risk from that, mention was made of the Trurex tunnel collapse, and I swear that's the bane of my existence, because I responded to the Trurex tunnel collapse, and there really was not a risk to the public from that, as far as like a release of contamination or a risk of exposure. But, it shut down the site for 3 days, and I think about what happened to PFP not long after, which I also responded to, and there was a loss of contamination control. We had a conversation yesterday where you were getting air samples on the other side of the rattlesnake barricade with detectable amounts of contamination on them. But somehow that wasn't the big emergency. But what caused that wasn't an airplane flew into the demolition site. It was because there was complacency, and they started diluting the fixative because it was clogging up the spraying equipment. It's like, let's just add more water to it and add more water to it. So there's your risk anymore, in my opinion.
The same thing with PFP explosion, public perception was just ludicrous. We were getting phone calls from the United Kingdom, Germany, China. They were all calling our office, wanting to know why we were marching people through this radioactive cloud out of PFP. Even had a big picture, a drawing that came out of the UK. People slumped over, walking through this red cloud. Oh my Lord, and that's the communications of the risk. In fact, I could even say something about, I used to work for a newspaper, and people tend to forget all news media is a business. They are there to make money. And the way they make money, those things that draw the public in to take a look at whatever they're selling, that's what they're going to do. If they can tweak things a little bit, that's why you see in the news, bad news sells better than good news, because they're there to sell their media to people. So don't get too upset if you think they're not reporting the right thing or the wrong thing. Just think about what they are. They're a business, just like construction. So anyway.
I'd like to bring up the biological risk. You know, not just hampered traffic, but, you know, there's biological risks, you know, the elk and the deer, you know, we've had fatalities on the site.
Sagebrush, blowing sagebrush.
Long sagebrush shuts down the site because it picks up huge rocks, you know, hitting cars going out, you know, to the site and.
And you were mentioning the other day that, hornets are attracted to the high-vis vests.
Oh, yeah, yeah, I got chased around the building a couple days ago because I'm wearing safety gear that attracts biological hazards. So, yeah, you know, you have to you know, weigh the risk, but, you know, scorpions, snakes, you know. But the biggest one with the, you know, fatalities on the site is the elk.
I'd like to bring up energy risks in the future, where we have shortages of energy due to the proliferations of electric cars, Bitcoin factories, mines, AI, issues, draw a lot of power. What are we doing to make sure the power is stayed on?
It just occurs to me that one of these risks, the overall thing, is that the Hanford site project itself is a risk reduction project to the public and to the future. So sometimes I forget about that. I mean, the whole thing is a risk reduction. So we take more risk over here, exposures to the occupational workers to reduce further risk to the general public and future generations.
The challenge that we see is as the site is more and more successful at reducing that risk, perception, education, outreach, people who are interested in the site, there's fewer of them because it's not scary and it's not in the news because the news doesn't report on it. So how do we, you know, keep that out there so when we're the last site in the Ian complex, Congress is still gonna fund us at the levels we need. That's Congress is my biggest risk, I think, because if we don't get the funding, we're not gonna get the site cleaned up. And we have, the nation has an obligation to do that. So. Awesome. Anything, so we merged back into risk because it's such a far-reaching topic. Is there anything else on anyone's mind that isn't risk or,
Risk of another leaking tank. Next one, when's the next one?
yeah, and not just tanks. There's a pipeline that's carrying clean water onto the site, that's going to TEDIC, which TEDIC is
Treated effluent disposal facility.
treated effluent disposal facility. So the raw water pipeline is going to TEDIC. Apparently, one of the pump houses, the pump failed, and so when they quit, and I don't know the details, maybe this is something I'm gonna ask for probably in January, briefing on. Apparently, there was a request in September for discharge to ground surface of up to 150 gallons a minute of raw river water, so not contaminated water, but it's going into the Central Plateau. And that's water moves waste. So is it being injected near a waste site? If that, you know, what was in that waste site, what's in the water table below that? Because eventually that water is gonna get down to groundwater and, I think it was like 20, if it runs for as long as the request was for, it could be up to like 20 million gallons of water discharged.
Did it break in the 200 east or 200 west area?
It's over the carbon tech boom.
Over where?
Carbon tech, so ZP one.
West.
Yeah, 200 west.
Okay.
So, you know, that's something that's been on my mind and,
Is it still broken and leaking?
it's still, so it's not leaking, but they do a discharge when they back flush, some of the filters. Because it was the line that takes I don't know exactly what the details are, so, that's all I know is that was, I think, Brian Vance requested to Ecology September 5th or 6th. the discharge permit, and that's what it is. It's clean water, but it's over the central plateau, so, it could impact the Vado snow.
Just consider the soil question.
Right, but there is a pump and treat system, but is it adequately capturing whatever contaminants that are other than carbon tetrachloride? That's.
I've posed this question before with other professionals with the Hanford site. And the question is, would you be willing to move to the inside the Hanford site with your family and live there? And if so, where? And then you get a real clear picture of your risk tolerance versus somebody else's risk tolerance. Like I would.
Rattlesnake
I
Mountain,
wouldn't, huh?
Rattlesnake Mountain.
Yeah, that might be some culture, but some people are like, no, not till it's cleaned up. What do you, then you start getting this dialogue about, well, how much of that has to be removed for you to feel safe for you, family, to actually live there. I move out there in a heartbeat. But that's a good question to ask your other peers when you're ready to accept it.
Yeah, that's something, since this is open forum, this isn't happening, but Oregon's definition of radioactive waste is based on a scenario where someone spreads a semi-infinite plane of the material and then builds a house on it, lives on the house 90% of the time and gardens on it.
Right.
So that's our risk tolerance for radiation in our laws. So, yeah, similar, would you be willing to live on it? Would you be willing to fill a playground with the sand? And, yeah, that's.
Ask yourself. And I think your earlier comment about acceptance is really gonna be based on reach a final outcome with tank waste. I mean, it's almost gonna, in my mind, it's gonna be like a on and off switch. It's risky now, but once that's done, regardless of all the other cleanup, then it's gonna be, the public's gonna say, oh, what are we paying for the life? And I think you're right on that.
People around the country are very frustrated with Hanford because we are going to vitrify low activity waste. People around the world do not think is necessary.
Correct.
And they don't want to spend the money. And so there is going to be a forced interpretation of what is high level waste as a result. That the Energy Community Alliance is furious with the state of Washington.
So
We're taking their money.
keep this conversation going. Keep this conversation going next committee meeting, because that's important. The question I was about to go to, I forgot.
Committee business?
Committee business we could get to, where was I going? I guess we'll go to committee business and come back to it. Thank you for all the new folks who are here. This has been a really great conversation, and I think I hope that the agencies will get a lot out of our conversation about where we think risk is and what it means and how we can frame this advice. We have a couple of things on committee business, one of which is the vice chair election. The term for chair and vice chair started October 1st. And our previous vice chair turned off the board also on September 30th. So we don't have a vice chair right now. We have someone who's willing to be vice chair. And we're open for nominations up until we vote. So if there are any primaries that want to be vice chair of the committee, throw your hat in the ring now or forever hold your peace until next year. And it's a 1-year term. And so, Josh, how do you want to?
I suppose I'll start with. Is anybody else interested in serving?
Who's already nominated?
Jim Doherty has said he's willing to serve, and
His mom said he'd never miss a meeting.
So he's gonna learn from the fire hose here, and so recently appointed as the primary member for Oregon Hanford Cleanup Board. And I'm recently Oregon Department of Energy's primary, so I'm able to serve again. We had elections for me back in March.
Yeah, it was springtime.
But yeah, we didn't have anyone willing or able to serve because alternates were the only people who were willing to serve. So yeah, Jim has said he'd step up.
So consider him nominated.
He's been nominated and has accepted the nomination, so we just need committee, vote unless, if no one else wants it, then we can say, yes, he's the vice, and if someone else wants to jump in, run with him.
We're doing Robert's Rules of Order.
No, we don't do that.
Or consensus based.
Yeah.
Was anyone else interested in self-nominating? Line, you can also jump in if needed.
Yeah, how about on the phone?
Considering we've been asking for a vice chair for the past 8 months. I think. Yeah, I appreciate that, yes. And Josh already asked online.
Oh, we did.
And silence in the room and silence online, so. See.
Okay,
That one nominee.
excellent.
Well, congratulations, Jim.
Welcome, Mr. Vice Chair.
It's too late for me to know.
Okay. So, and our standard practice is whenever someone voices an interest, we include them on sort of the committee discussions at the leadership level. So I've been CCing them on everything, so he knows how many emails he's going to get. So, all right, so next meeting plan. Our next meeting is in January, and it's the week of January
It's the 15th and the 16th.
15th or 16th. I think, usually this meeting would have been our groundwater meeting, but the site-wide groundwater report got pushed back this year. I think that it's gonna be right around time in January for that to be right. So I'd like to propose that we do a groundwater meeting next January.
So I'll take that request back to Naomi and her staff and see who is available or what can be presented at that time, see if that's the right time.
Okay, do the agencies have anything they think is gonna be right, in January?
And as I shared, Tom, we have been so busy that we haven't worked the January yet, so
Right.
I apologize that I don't have more information for you.
EPA?
I'd have to confer with my counterparts at DOE just to make sure that I'm not speaking out of turn.
Okay.
Some items.
Same here, if there is the request, I can bring it back, water.
Well, I see you're trying to say something.
Well, yeah, I was wondering if you'd be interested in a joint meeting, with tanks and, on the subject of cross-site transfer system.
So I believe that wasn't going to be right until later towards the end of FY 20.
And that might be with
Wonder,
infrastructure.
But it is on our radar.
okay.
Yeah, I think that should be infrastructure.
So under groundwater, I have sort of, we have a standing wish list of groundwater briefs. So I'll just spell all those out and understanding that, we may or may not be able to support all or any of them. We always ask for an update on the uranium sequestration that we heard a little bit about earlier from Bandana. What that is in the 300 area, there was a uranium plume right at the water table and in a periodically re-wetted zone. So as the river stage goes up and down, the groundwater was picking up sort of a smear zone of uranium. And so they did a project where they injected really hot polyphosphate chemicals to try to make minerals out of those uranium atoms. So it didn't get into groundwater anymore. And those injections ended in 2018, I think, and we're still waiting to see whether there's a report on how effective that was. Then on the tour, Rick, our tour guide, said that we typically get a update on how many new wells were installed in the last year. And that's something that hasn't been in recent reports or presentations, I don't think, but it might be interesting just to see that, there's a lot of drilling still going on, and as the plumes change, the definition of the plumes change, they insert new wells to make sure that the map that they draw of the plume is right. So that would be good to know. Lindsay?
Sure. So for the new folks that are in the room, typically how we frame meetings is we have our annual work plan, and I believe Susan and me had talked to this yesterday. And so we take a look at the work plan, see what's available to bring to committee and kind of plan accordingly. So as Tom shared for the groundwater informational briefing, one thing that we talked about at the leadership workshop was what may or may not be included in that update. And so what I have listed on here is potentially the rebound studies in the river corridor, groundwater remediation along the river corridor, 100D and 100H, 61811 enhanced monitoring evaluation, and then also touching on the 300 area uranium sequestration.
I would like to see if we can add the TENF pipeline as an emerging issue. Because it is river water that's being injected or discharged on the river.
So I will take that back to Naomi and see if that's something that can be able to be supported.
So that's the list that we have. And if there's any questions about those topics, I know a lot of them are stuff you've never heard about, some of you. Or if you have any just questions about what the groundwater monitoring plan looks like. Typically they come with the updated plume maps and, talk about how much contaminant has been removed by the pump and treat system, which we saw at the tour.
And from a process standpoint, I just wanted to point out, like Tom just brought up the TEDF pipeline. That's not something that was on the work plan, so that is something that I'll take back and I will see if our SME subject matter experts can support. And so that's kind of how that process works. If there's something that's not on the work plan, the group is requesting, I'll go back and I'll ask the question.
We take this time to say, okay, here's the advices that are coming up. So we want a briefing on that, or we throw spaghetti at the wall and see what DOE is able to make stick.
And when we bring our briefers in, we want to make sure that we're giving you guys the right briefings and the right information. So this conversation is always really important before we go back and start planning.
The broken pipeline might be a good topic for a board meeting too. That might have broader interest than just wrap committee here. The CaRM.
We're not wrapping anymore. The committee that preceded CaRM was the River and Plateau Committee, so you might hear some people call us the RAP, and that's us. Bob, did you have your hand up? Or?
Yeah, is there any interest in hearing the path forward on the existing canyon or heat plant?
That is a brief that we have requested and is on the work plan for a later date. So, yes.
So there's something there, okay.
I think it'd be really great to, and then with merging back into open forum a little bit, and that's okay because we're sort of in the same time window. But I think it'd be really great to hear sort of the history of the canyon disposition decisions. How do we get where we are? Craig Cameron for EPA was one of the people who was instrumental in that decision. He just retired. We're losing some of that institutional knowledge. So how do we keep that knowledge around what documents would be, what is that recorded and where do we find it? So, yeah, that's on my pipe dream list of stuff.
Lindsay, can you tell us when the next full board meeting is scheduled?
November 6th.
November 6th, okay.
And then after that,
The day after election day.
and after that, we have February 12 and 13.
Lindsay, full board, just November 6th,
Correct.
all day.
All like a 9 to 4:30 is what we're meeting right now.
And then the thought is on November 7th, we would have a work session for issue manager teams if they want them. So cleanup priorities perhaps would be a good, might be too late no, it won't be too late for cleanup priorities.
Probably like to get it approved in February like we did this year.
Right.
In order to be in sync with the DOE budget timeline.
Yeah.
That's good. So that's where, we have the opportunity to streamline the September meeting to a one-day meeting due to November. I don't even know what day it is anymore. Yeah, it's October 10th. I remember that. Okay, so the November meeting, we have the opportunity to streamline, which provides the opportunity while folks are in town to get together in person and work their issue manager teamwork.
The other thing that's going on right now, which is not an issue manager's team, and it is a work group, is we have volunteers to digest the 20,000 plus page Rev 9A when it comes out. I'm on that group. I don't know, we have like 3 or 4 other folks that are, have least interest. And my thought is, we'll put, or Rebecca's in there. My thought is we'll sort of break up the document and do book reports, and no one has to read all of it unless they want to.
I'm sorry, what was this document again?
Rev 9A of the Hanford River permit, site-wide permit, which is impending but not soon, right?
Spring,
Spring.
20,000 pages, how are you gonna do that?
Very carefully.
One page at a time, right?
Yeah. So yeah, that's the other work group that could potentially meet that day. To sort of, even though we don't have the document yet, we could sort of say, I'm really interested in this section of it and sort of try to break some of that up.
And my recommendation would be if there are issue manager team leads who would like time, I encourage you to reach out to Josh because we only have one day. So you'll want to get your time on the agenda.
Particularly if there are no committee meetings associated with those meetings. That's ESC for the fiscal year and ESC for the work group.
Lindsay's off topic. When we were on the tour the other day, the tour guide said that the archaeologist had found a historic site that they thought was kind of out of the ordinary, and they were excavating it and looking at it. And I think it'd be neat to have, you know, an update on what that is, or maybe the whole monument, what they, you know, the archaeology out there.
Let me step back.
Yeah, maybe just an overview of the cultural and historic surveys process and the program, not necessarily the specific site. Because
No, I
a
want.
lot of places are very sensitive, and we don't want to.
Yeah.
Or something we can't get. Yeah, so just maybe an overview of the cultural regulatory framework.
I'm gonna ask something for the lids committee, just so that,
Yeah.
for the issue manager stuff. Is there a, timeline as far as response to our traffic safety, right?
So we strive to respond to all advice by the next board meeting. So ideally, we would, the department would have their response to the group by November. With that being said, again, the group has been very, very busy, so I can't commit to having all 3 responses to the group, but we're working really hard to do that.
Right,
So,
okay.
Okay.
So, yeah, an issue manager team wouldn't be appropriate then for the, I was just thinking for the next day.
Something that everybody could be aware of, the Carlsbad Field Office recently published their definition of legacy true waste, transuranic waste. And there's a public comment period that closes in January. As we issued advice on sort of what we think that definition is. And in my opinion, what they actually decided is almost identical to what we asked for. But I leave that up to you if you want to read that and make your own comments. Just be aware that it's something that this committee has been interested in and it's out there now. So maybe Josh, at some point you could, we put the link in the Thursday emails a couple times, but just if you didn't get the link, check your Thursday emails. And if you still can't find it, Josh or I can get it to you. It's a pretty easy read. It's like 120 something pages, I think.
So I saw an article early this morning as well. I didn't get a chance to read it, but the GAO has put out something regarding the high-level waste building and stopping construction on that. They just had a report that I just saw this morning. So kind of interesting.
That's the 3rd GAO report this year that touches us. So yeah, that's kind of interesting.
So just, in case anybody wants to go look at that.
That would be good to bring up in this afternoon. What?
GAO, as far the high level waste, how they're going back and finishing design and building.
Yeah.
HLW, yeah, the GAO, there's a thing that popped up about, they're urging Department of Energy to stop construction and design on the HLW and look at other alternatives.
Okay, so that's definitely for next committee.
That came in the Energy Communities Alliance. paperwork. Where that came.
Well, it just came up on my phone.
If you're-
As an article, so
if you have
I
that-
bring it back.
We can have that conversation next committee because we've got like 4 minutes left for any other committee business that needs to happen. And I always like to try to end my meetings early, so, and I have to solidly in type waste, alleyway. So any other committee business that needs to get brought up, any other ideas for January? If we do, I like maybe a groundwater theme or that type of thing. If you're interested in joining IM teams, talk to Josh. It's a great way to learn and meet people. Anything else? Roberto?
Yeah, I just want to say I appreciate the conversation earlier regarding the risk communication and perception. Cass, she's online. She wasn't able to introduce herself earlier, but I think for both of us, this was really helpful. So thank you for your time. Really.
Okay, Lindsay, do you want to close us out?
Sure, this meeting is adjourned. Thanks everyone for your participation. We lose you that late.